The lie of rest. When stillness is a trap, you think falling asleep is a matter of habit, of posture, of shutting down the noise. But what if the real reason you can't sleep is that stillness feels dangerous? You lie in bed, the lights out, the screen's gone, the stimulation withdrawn, and suddenly, everything inside you wakes up. Thoughts you thought you buried, feelings you swore you'd already processed, fears you learned to ignore during the noise of the day. They crawl up your spine in the quiet like insects long starved for attention. And now the room isn't quiet at all. It's screaming. That's not insomnia. That's memory. That's not overthinking. That's a survival mechanism. You were never taught how to rest. You were taught how to freeze. There's a difference in trauma psychology. The freeze response is one of the 4 automatic survival mechanisms of the nervous system. Fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. The body becomes motionless, not because it's safe, but because it's overwhelmed. The prey animal who can't escape goes still, not in surrender, but in paralysis. You call it sleep paralysis, but it's not just biological, it's emotional. What if every night you are not entering a peaceful slumber, but returning to a battlefield where your body still believes it's under attack? Every time you close your eyes, your mind replays unhealed chaos, not because it hates you, but because it's trying to warn you, trying to finish what was never finished, trying to resolve what was left unresolved. Sleep is supposed to be surrender, but for you, it's survival. Stillness is sacred, they say. But stillness was the moment you were yelled at and couldn't speak back. Stillness was the hallway after the door slammed. Stillness was the hospital bed. Stillness was the silence before the next disaster. Stillness was the sound of waiting to be abandoned again. So your body associates stillness with threat. You chase stimulation to feel safe. You play noise to drown the silence. You scroll to avoid being alone with what's inside you. But what if your sleep problems are not a failure of discipline, but a natural response to a nervous system conditioned to fear rest? This is why sleep hygiene hacks don't work for you. Because the problem isn't the light, or the room temperature, or the blue light from your phone. It's what sleep represents. Not peace, but helplessness. Not calm, but exposure. When the lights go out, your history turns on. Let's go deeper. The human brain is a prediction machine. Neuroscientists like Carl Friston argue that the brain constantly generates models to reduce uncertainty and surprise. It doesn't just react, it predicts. And it doesn't stop predicting when you fall asleep. That's why your dreams don't always make sense, because they aren't meant to. They're your brain's distorted attempt to rehearse possible outcomes, to simulate safety by simulating threat. Sleep is supposed to be recovery, but for the traumatized brain, it's rehearsal. And if you grew up in unpredictable environments where love was conditional, anger was sudden, safety was never promised, your brain never learned how to rest, because rest made you vulnerable. So now you try to fall asleep, and your body starts rehearsing old strategies: hypervigilance, tension, scanning the room in the dark for what might go wrong. Even lying still, your internal world runs a full marathon. Even in bed, you're bracing for impact. You've trained yourself to be productive, not peaceful, to be alert, not aware, to be pleasing, not present. So why would your nervous system trust the act of doing nothing? This is the trap of modern wellness. It gives you tools without telling you why you can't use them. It hands you bread, but not safety. It sells you meditation, but not meaning. You tried gratitude lists, but you're still afraid of being too happy in case it's ripped away. You journal your thoughts, but the paper starts to feel like a crime scene. You take melatonin, but your body still waits for the next betrayal. You are not broken. You are adapted, but your adaptations are killing your rest. Stillness is now a mirror, and most people don't like what they see. That's why the world offers you endless distractions, content, scrolling, supplements, background noise, not to help you sleep, but to help you forget what sleep will show you. Because real surrender means trusting your unconscious mind. And if you've been punished, abandoned, or violated by people you were told to trust, why would you ever trust yourself? Sleep requires safety. Safety requires trust. Trust requires truth. So here is the truth. You don't have a sleep disorder. You have a life that never taught your body to stop running. Your body is not sabotaging. It is protecting you from ghosts you haven't yet named. And they show up loudest when the world goes quiet. Maybe you can't sleep because part of you believes deeply, silently, that rest will be punished, that if you let your guard down, you'll pay for it, that if you fall asleep, you'll lose control. And here's the paradox. The very act of surrender that could heal you feels like a threat to the parts of you that were built to survive danger. You don't need sleep hacks. You need to understand why the silence screams. And maybe you can't fix it tonight. Maybe you don't need to. Maybe you only need to understand that the version of you who cannot sleep is not lazy or undisciplined or weak. She is the soldier who never came home, the guard who never left the post, the child who learned to stay awake because danger always came at night, and when you lie down to rest, you carry all of her. So the next time you feel your mind racing the moment your head hits the pillow, ask yourself, what part of me still believes the world is not safe unless I'm awake to guard it? And if that's true, what exactly are you guarding yourself from now? Because the war ended years ago, but your body never left the battlefield. And if your body never left, what if sleep is the real enemy? Sometimes it's not the darkness outside that keeps you up, but the illusions you carry into it. The fear of letting go. Why you can't fall asleep without control. You call it insomnia. But what if it's just your addiction to control wearing a different mask? You brush your teeth, dim the lights, lay your body in bed, and then you try to make yourself sleep. But sleep is not something you make. It's something you allow. It's not an action. It's a surrender. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because somewhere along the way, you learned that surrender is dangerous. That letting go means letting something bad happen. That the moment you stop holding the wheel, the car crashes. So you grip tighter, you tensed your jaw, you micromanage your breath, you rehearse tomorrow's disasters in your head, like they'll listen if you prepare hard enough. But sleep requires you to loosen, and your nervous system has no blueprint for that. Letting go is not restful for you. Letting go feels like dying. Here's what they don't tell you about control. It's not about power, it's about fear. It's about trying to protect the parts of you that were once helpless. The child who didn't understand why the door slammed. The teenager who blamed themselves for not being loved back. The adult who now tries to predict every outcome to avoid pain. Control is the safety blanket of the emotionally betrayed. So now, when the world quiets and you're alone with yourself, control becomes your only defense. Your mind spins plans, imaginary conversations, worst-case scenarios, not because you like chaos, but because it's familiar. Certainty became your god, because unpredictability was your hell. In 1944, the psychologist John Bowlby began studying orphans during wartime. He noticed something strange. Even when physically cared for, many of them failed to thrive. They couldn't attach, couldn't regulate emotions, couldn't sleep. Why? Because they had learned that connection is unpredictable, and that unpredictability hardwires itself into the brain like a scar. This is the foundation of insecure attachment, and it rewires how you experience rest. When you don't trust others, you compensate by trying to trust control. But control doesn't soothe. It simulates. You try to control your room, no sound, no light, no movement. You try to control your body, no shifting, no tossing. You try to control your thoughts, counting sheep, mantras, silence. But sleep isn't listening to any of it, because sleep only comes to those who feel safe releasing control. And you've never felt safe letting go. Let me ask you something dark. When you're falling asleep and you feel yourself slipping into unconsciousness, do you ever jerk awake, like your body yanks you back from the edge? That's not caffeine. That's not screen time. That's psychological whiplash from years of being taught that letting go is code for danger. You've trained yourself to associate control with survival. So when you let go, even for a second, your mind panics. Because letting go means you might miss something. You might get hurt. You might lose control of what people think of you. You might get left behind. And worst of all, you might have to feel everything you've suppressed. Because control doesn't just manage your time. It manages your emotions. It protects you from your grief, from your guilt, from your rage. Sleep strips all that away. And that's terrifying. Let's go deeper. In neuroscience, there's something called the default mode network, DM. It's the brain's background activity when you're not focused on a task when you're resting. But for people with trauma, the DMN becomes hyperactive during rest. Why? Because your brain starts ruminating. That it plays loops, it replays pain, it re-narrates events, trying to find logic where there was only betrayal. That's why doing nothing feels like hell, because your brain is never really doing nothing. Even your silence is screaming. You try to sleep, but your DMN hijacks you, and instead of drifting off, you drift into shame, into what-ifs, into imaginary arguments, into memories you didn't consent to relive. You're not resting, you're relapsing. And the cruel irony, the more you try to control it, the worse it gets. Sleep is not a task, it is a trust fall with your own mind, and you don't trust your mind, because your mind betrayed you when it started believing the lies others told you, that you weren't good enough, that your pain didn't matter, that love was conditional. So now, sleep becomes a battlefield, where your beliefs get louder than your biology. You don't lie awake because you're broken. You lie awake because you're brilliant. You've used control to build a fortress. And now, sleep is the intruder trying to climb over the wall. But here's the final cruelty of control. It makes you feel like rest is earned. You don't just allow yourself to sleep. You think you have to deserve it. You didn't work hard enough today. You didn't finish the list. You didn't prove yourself. So your mind withholds sleep like a punishment. You stay up trying to solve problems that don't exist, trying to fix your past from your pillow, trying to outthink your exhaustion. But sleep is not earned. It's not a reward. It's a right. And yet, you don't believe that, because you were raised on conditions. You had to be good to be loved. So now you think you have to be perfect to be peaceful. But what if peace never belonged to the perfect? What if peace belongs to the unguarded? And what if unguarded is the one thing you never learned to be? You lie there, waiting to fall asleep. But maybe the truth is darker than that. Maybe you don't want to fall asleep, because falling asleep means letting go. And letting go feels too much like falling apart, so you clutch your control. You scan the dark. You beg for rest, while fearing what it requires. And in doing so, you become the jailer and the prisoner, the guard and the captive, the insomniac and the interrogator. You are not fighting sleep. You are fighting surrender. And every night, you lose. And if surrender is no longer safe, what happens when even dreams start to betray you? The betrayal of dreams, when your subconscious turns against you. Sleep is supposed to be an escape, a refuge, a place where the world goes silent, and your mind slips into peace. But what if your dreams are not a sanctuary but a stage for your past to reenact its violence? What if your own subconscious is not your ally, but your oldest abuser? You close your eyes expecting stillness, and instead, your sleep drags you into grotesque simulations of things you didn't ask to remember, people you swore you buried, versions of yourself you thought had died. They return at night, not as memories, but as twisted stories your brain retells, hoping to resolve what you never got to understand. It's not random, it's rehearsal. It's the subconscious performing a trauma opera on repeat, because nobody stayed for the final act the first time. Let's talk about dreams. In 1977, Harvard psychiatrist Alan Hobson proposed that dreams are the result of random brainstem activity during REM sleep, but even Hobson later revised his view, because the randomness wasn't so random. Modern neuroscience shows that dreams are emotionally coded. In fact, your amygdala, the brain's fear center, is highly active during dreaming. That's why nightmares don't always make sense, but always make you feel. Your dreams are emotionally prioritized reruns, and if your waking life is a performance of control, your dreaming life is the rehearsal of chaos. Dreams speak in symbol, but trauma distorts symbol into weapon, so you don't dream of the argument. You dream of drowning. You don't dream of abandonment. You dream of being chased and never caught. You don't dream of betrayal. You dream of a house on fire with no exit. The metaphor is not the issue. The issue is that you wake up with your heart pounding like it never stopped living through it, because it didn't. What does that do to your sleep? It makes you fear the one place you're supposed to find peace. You delay going to bed. You overconsume, overstimulate, overthink, because sleep is not a relief. It's a confrontation. You are scared of what you'll see, because the dream world does not lie to you. It does not obey your persona. It drags you down past ego into what Carl Jung called the shadow, and the shadow is merciless. Jung believed that your dreams are not just messages, they are revelations of what you suppress. You might suppress anger in daylight, but in dreams, you scream. You might suppress grief in front of others, but in dreams, you sob without shame. You might suppress guilt, but in dreams, you run from invisible judgment with no escape. Your dreams are the part of you that never got to speak, and now they have the stage. Unfiltered, untamed, unedited. You say you want rest, but your subconscious doesn't believe you, because to rest is to face yourself, and you've spent your life building armor to avoid that. Here's the darkest truth. Sometimes, dreams aren't nightmares. They're just honesty you weren't ready for. The faces of those who hurt you, the things you should have said, the moments that changed you in ways you never acknowledged. Dreams force you to relive what you refused to feel, and the betrayal is not that your subconscious shows it. The betrayal is that no one warned you sleep would ever feel like this. You were told sleep is healing, but nobody tells you healing hurts. The dreams that wake you up sweating are not errors, they are emotional autopsies. Sleep becomes the mortuary of every version of you that died silently, while you survived out loud, and now your dreams are crowded with ghosts, not just of people, but of selves. The self who didn't speak up, the self who believed them, the self who endured it all and never told anyone, the self who's still waiting for someone to come save her. They all gather in the silence of sleep and demand to be seen. So you fear dreaming, but you can't avoid it, because to be human is to dream. And the betrayal is this: even when your body finally surrenders, even when you drift past the noise, past the control, past the tension, you are not free. You are thrown into an abyss built entirely from your own past. You are locked in a theater with no exits, watching scenes you didn't write, being played by characters you once trusted, written in a language your conscious mind has forgotten, but your nervous system remembers perfectly. There's a reason some people wake up more exhausted than when they went to sleep. It's not because they didn't rest, it's because they never stopped fighting. They fought themselves in their own dreams. They argued with ghosts. They ran from metaphors of their own trauma. You didn't sleep, you just changed battlefields. You're not an insomniac, a fugitive from your own unconscious mind. Here's the cruelty of the sleep industry. They sell you dream journals. They sell you lucid dreaming courses. They tell you to decode symbols. But nobody asks, what if the dream isn't meant to be understood? What if it's meant to break you open? And what if breaking open is the only way to rest? You long for escape. But your dreams aren't escapism. They're evidence, proof that your body has recorded everything, that nothing is ever forgotten. Not really. And when the world goes silent, your mind finally has the freedom to scream. You call it a nightmare, but it's just your pain, uncensored. You don't wake up tired because your sleep was shallow. You wake up tired because your past spent the night dragging itself across your skin. You slept through a storm no one else could see, and when you open your eyes, you're already exhausted from surviving what wasn't even real, except it was you. Want rest? But rest would mean letting the ghosts talk. And the truth is, you're not sure you'd survive hearing what they have to say. And if even sleep is not safe, what happens when your body begins to rebel against rest itself? The body that won't obey. Why your biology fights sleep like a threat. You think your mind is the problem, but your body remembers more than your mind ever could. And your body, despite your routines, your rituals, your willpower won't let go, because it's been trained to survive, not to rest. You lie in bed, you close your eyes, you count backwards from 100. But your heart won't slow down. Your muscles won't soften. Your chest tightens like there's an invisible weight pressing down on it. You've done everything right. So why does your body act like it's bracing for disaster? Because it is. The nervous system doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about patterns. And yours have taught it that stillness is dangerous. Your autonomic nervous system, the system that regulates everything from heart rate to digestion, operates with brutal efficiency, and once it's wired for vigilance, it doesn't believe your candles or chamomile tea. This is not about self-care, this is about neurobiology. Let's go deeper. There are two main branches of your autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic, which activates stress and alertness, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which activates rest and digestion. But here's what most people don't understand. If you spend too much of your life in fight or flight, your body begins to normalize it. It becomes your default state. Hyperarousal is not just a mental state, it becomes a cellular identity. Your breath stays shallow, your digestion slows, your pupils dilate, your heart races for no visible reason, because your body assumes threat, even in the absence of danger. This is why sleep hacks fail. They're fighting a biology that's working exactly as it was trained to. You are not broken. You are efficiently traumatized. In 1994, Dr. Stephen Porges introduced the polyvagal theory, a groundbreaking framework for understanding how the vagus nerve governs the body's response to safety and danger. He revealed that the body constantly scans for threat, a process called neuroception without conscious awareness. That means your body might detect threat in silence, in softness, in stillness, because those were once the moments you were hurt the most. And if your neuroception identifies calm as unfamiliar, it will respond with alarm. You lie down to rest, but your heart spikes, your breath shortens, your body floods with cortisol. You interpret this as anxiety, but it's just your nervous system preparing for the worst, because that's what it was taught to do. You're not tired because you're stressed. You're tired because your body has been on for decades. You don't have a sleep disorder. You have a nervous system that's never been told it's safe to turn off. You try progressive muscle relaxation. Your body tenses harder. You try meditation. Your thoughts get louder. You try sleep music. Your skin itches like it's rejecting peace, and then you blame yourself. But this isn't your fault. It's your biology, performing exactly as it was conditioned to. Think about it. If you spent years in environments where danger could erupt without warning, where shouting followed silence, where touch was unpredictable, where emotions were shamed or ignored, your body learned to anticipate harm, even when none is present. That's called learned vigilance. It's not psychological. It's physical. It lives in your fascia, your muscles, your gut, and when you try to sleep, you're not just battling thoughts. You're battling a body that was trained to flinch at safety. This is the betrayal. Your mind wants sleep. Your body doesn't believe it's allowed to have it, so it fights. It tenses. It resists. Because somewhere in your history, letting go led to pain, and your body never forgot, even when your mind did. That's why your bed feels like a trap. Why your sheets feel like restraints. Why silence feels like pressure. Why nightfall brings panic, because the body doesn't live in linear time. It lives in associative time. It remembers the feeling of moments, not the chronology. It remembers the time you were touched without permission, the time you were yelled at for crying, the time you pretended to be asleep while listening for danger. And now it associates lying down with powerlessness, darkness with exposure, relaxation with vulnerability. So what do? You perform rituals. You try lavender oils. You rearrange your pillows. You micromanage the temperature. But none of that works, because your body doesn't need external comfort. It needs internal permission, and it's never received that. You want to know why you wake up at 3 a.m. in a panic? Because your body thinks it's saving you. It's rehearsing survival. It's disrupting deep sleep because that's when you're most unguarded. You can't fix that with apps, because this is not a sleep problem. This is a safety problem. And safety is not logical. It's somatic. It has to be felt. And your body doesn't feel safe. Not at night. Not alone. Not in stillness. This is the prison. You long for sleep. But sleep requires surrender. And surrender is a foreign language to a body raised in chaos. You teach your brain everything. You never taught your flesh how to stop bracing. It's not your bedtime that needs adjusting. It's your biology that needs reprogramming. And that takes more than a checklist. That takes grief. Because you have to grieve the decades your body spent surviving. The years you never relaxed. The nights you pretended to be okay while your heart broke silently under your ribs. You have to grieve the part of you that never learned to receive softness without suspicion. So now, the very thing that could restore you sleep becomes the one thing your body fights hardest, and each night, your nervous system stands at the gates of your rest. armed ready, convinced peace is a lie. You're not failing to sleep. You're failing to override a body that's done nothing but protect you. And what if it's not ready to stop? But what if the war doesn't end in the body or the mind? What if it continues through time itself? Time is lying to you. How Chronos became your master. You lie awake, watching the clock. 2:13 a.m., 2:47, 3:21. You don't sleep. You measure. You calculate how much rest you'll get if you fall asleep right now. You panic as the window narrows. You bargain with the remaining hours. You grieve your performance tomorrow before the day has even arrived. And in doing so, you prove one thing. You don't belong to yourself. You belong to time. The Greeks had two words for time, Chronos and Kairos. Chronos is the god of measurable time. Minutes, hours, deadlines, schedules, routines. Productivity. Kairos is the god of timelessness. Moments that exist outside the clock. A kiss, a revelation, a grief so full it swallows the air. A state of flow, a surrender to now. You were born into Chronos. You were raised by Chronos, and Chronos has no interest in your rest. This is the tyranny of modern life. Your entire worth has been reduced to time spent and time optimized. How fast can you fall asleep? How quickly can you recover? How productive can you be tomorrow? You're not trying to rest. You're trying to hack rest. You've internalized time like a command. Your body responds to the clock more than it responds to itself. You set alarms, not just to wake up, but to control who you'll be the next day. Time, once a river, became a whip, and you became its obedient animal. But here's what they don't tell you. The more you chase sleep, the more you objectify it, the more it escapes you, because sleep belongs to Kairos, not Chronos. Sleep exists outside of time. It cannot be summoned by force. It will not arrive on command. It's a state of surrender, not a task to complete. And yet you lie there, watching the ticking seconds, like a prisoner measuring their sentence. This is no accident. Capitalism taught you that sleep is a means to something else, not a state worth valuing on its own. Sleep is only respected if it increases productivity, if it improves cognition, if it optimizes focus. So rest becomes another form of labor, another bullet point on your self-improvement plan. Even your dreams are now data. Even your bedtime has a routine so militarized it could be mistaken for war prep. You've been convinced that being tired is a moral failure, that exhaustion is weakness, that rest must be earned, and when you finally lie down, the guilt of rest strangles the rest itself. Let's go deeper. In physics, time is not a constant. Einstein's theory of relativity revealed that time dilates, contracts, bends. It is subjective. It is a function of perspective and motion. But your life isn't governed by relativistic time. It's governed by mechanical time, industrial time, factory bell time, bell curve time, deadline time, school time, work time, alarm clock time. You were taught to treat time as fixed, linear, unforgiving, and so when sleep refuses to follow your schedule, you panic. Not because you're tired, but because you're failing the machine. You think you're broken, but the clock is. This is how time colonized your nervous system. You were taught that life happens in milestones. You were given timelines for success. By 18, do this. By 25, achieve that. By 30, own something. By 40, be someone. And when you fail to meet these artificial checkpoints, your sense of safety disintegrates. So when sleep doesn't arrive on time, you experience not just frustration but failure of identity. Because in a society run by Chronos, not sleeping makes you less human. You're no longer a person. You're a faulty machine. You check your phone again. The blue light stabs your pupils. 4:06. And now your heart races. Not because of thoughts, but because the clock is watching. The time is running out. The time is slipping away. The time is taunting you. But what if the real poison isn't your insomnia? What if it's your relationship to time itself? Time has become your abuser. It dictates when you must wake. It shames you for rest. It rewards speed, not presence. So when you lie in bed, your body doesn't relax. It calculates. You're Rest becomes a math equation. What's the minimum amount of sleep I need to function? But sleep doesn't respond to math. It responds to mercy. And you've forgotten how to be merciful with yourself. There's a reason time feels heavier at night. Because at night, there are no distractions, no meetings, no content, no noise, just the clock, just you, and the sinking feeling that time is slipping and you're not enough to catch it. You weren't born afraid of time. You were taught to be, because if you fear time, you will buy control, you will buy schedules, you will buy biohacks and apps and optimization plans. Fear makes you consume, and consumption keeps the machine running, even in your sleep. The Greeks feared Chronos. He was a devourer of his children. Look at your own life. Has time not devoured you? Your childhood rushed, your youth judged, your aging feared, your stillness pathologized. Time didn't cradle you, it consumed you. And now, every night, you try to please it again. You measure your rest as if to prove your value to an invisible God who's never going to love you. But here's the secret. Time doesn't care. Time won't reward your discipline. It won't punish your chaos. It moves, indifferent. And that's why you panic, because what you really want is for time to stop, even for a moment. But it won't. So you keep chasing a rest that only arrives when you forget what time it is. You can't fall asleep because you're still trying to impress Chronos, still trying to make time proud of you, still trying to earn a peace that was never meant to be scheduled. So now I ask you, if time wasn't watching, would you still hate yourself for resting? And if you didn't live on a schedule, would you know who you are at all? But what if time isn't just mechanical? What if your very identity is built on a false sense of self, crafted by others, and now you can't sleep because the mask is cracking in the dark? The false self that keeps you awake. When the mask becomes your skin, you lie awake, not because of noise, but because your silence is full of contradiction. All day, you play the role. You smile, you nod, you function, but the moment the world turns off, your real self begins to scream, not out loud, not in words, but in the tension of your jaw, in the ache in your chest, in the thoughts that spiral like vultures circling what you've abandoned. The truth is brutal. You don't know who you are when no one's watching. Psychologists call it the false self, a concept developed by D.W. Winnicott, a British psychoanalyst who observed that children often construct a mask, a version of themselves they believe will be accepted, loved, protected. It starts in childhood, when expressing your truth got you punished, when being too loud meant being shut down, when showing sadness meant being shamed, when anger was met with abandonment, so you adapted. You smiled when you wanted to cry, you agreed when you disagreed, you stayed silent when you knew something was wrong, and over time, you lost track of the real you. The authentic self went underground, buried under performance, approval, duty, and fear, but it never disappeared. It waits, it watches, and at night when you're finally alone, it rises. This is why you can't sleep, because your false self is exhausted, and your real self is furious. All day, you pretend to be who the world demands. You play competent, you play calm, you play put together, but in the dark, with no one left to impress, the mask starts to melt, and what's underneath is messy, confused, lonely and tam. It's everything you've spent your life hiding, and now it wants to be seen. You don't fear sleep, you fear who you are when you're no longer pretending. That's why you binge, scroll, pace, ruminate. You delay sleep like a criminal delaying a trial, because you know the moment you close your eyes, the prosecution begins. Your real self steps into the courtroom of your mind and lists every compromise you made that day, every time you betrayed your truth, every time you said yes when you meant no, every time you laughed at something that hurt you, every time you made yourself small so someone else could feel big. And your body hears the verdict, not in words but in insomnia. Let's go deeper. The false self isn't evil. It was born to protect you. You created it to survive, to navigate power dynamics, to avoid rejection, to feel loved even if that love was only conditional. But the longer it stays in control, the more you lose your connection to authentic rest, because real sleep requires real safety, and you are never safe while pretending. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But most people trade that privilege for acceptance, for safety, for performance. You've spent decades building a self that's not entirely yours, a mosaic of everyone else's expectations, a patchwork of survival strategies. But here's the cost. Every time you abandon your truth to be loved, you teach your body that being real is dangerous, and if real is dangerous, then vulnerability is suicidal. And if vulnerability is suicidal, then sleep, true, unguarded, defenseless sleep, feels like a risk you cannot take. This is why some people sleep better with someone else beside them, not because they feel more loved, but because they feel more watched. And the false self thrives under observation. It feels safest when it has a role to perform. It dies in solitude. So when you're alone in bed, you're not resting. You're decomposing. The performance ends, and the person who's been silenced all day begins to wake. You call it anxiety, but it's not. It's identity collapse. It's your nervous system realizing that person you showed the world isn't the one who's trying to fall asleep. And it panics, because if you're not that person, then who are you? And can whoever you really are survive the daylight? You've built an identity based on value. You are smart, you are reliable, you are nice, you are productive, but you are not those things. You perform those things. And the deeper truth, you're terrified that if you stop performing, you'll be forgotten. Unloved, irrelevant, unseen, so you keep the mask on. Even in bed, you stay alert, you stay pleasing. You rehearse tomorrow's conversations in your mind, trying to make sure the false self is ready for the next act. But this is what you know. Deep down, pretending is exhausting. You are not tired because you did too much. You were tired because you were too much. For too long. Too much contradiction, too much suppression, too much pretending not to notice that something in you is dying from lack of honesty. There is a version of you buried beneath the mask. She is raw and scared and angry and soft. She wants to be held, not managed. She wants to be heard, not judged. She wants to sleep, not escape. But you've spent your whole life punishing her for being inconvenient, and now she punishes you back with restlessness. Here's the paradox. The false self helped you survive, but now it's killing your rest, because there is no rest without truth, and there is no truth in a performance. You can't sleep because sleep is a homecoming, and you don't know where home is anymore. So let me ask you something brutal. If you stopped being who everyone expects you to be, would there be anyone left to love? And if the answer is no, then what is it, exactly, that you're losing sleep to protect? And if you don't know who you are, what happens when even your memories start to betray you? Memory is a weapon. When your past rewrites itself while you sleep, you think your memories are fixed. You think what happened is what happened. But memory is not a file. It's a wound that reopens every time you touch it. And sleep is when the bandages fall off. You close your eyes, hoping for silence, and instead, you remember something differently. A face feels sharper, a word cuts deeper. An event you thought you understood suddenly unfolds with new weight, new angles, new shame. You're not dreaming, you're reliving, because your mind is not replaying the past, it's reconstructing it. Memory is not a recording device. It is a storyteller with a mood disorder. Every time you recall an event, you alter it. Neuroscientists call this memory reconsolidation. Your brain doesn't store experiences like files in a cabinet. It reassembles them based on current emotion, context, need. So the version of your childhood you remembered 10 years ago is not the version your nervous system is recalling. Tonight, at 2:14 a.m., you thought it was a harmless fight. Now you realize it was emotional violence. You thought they were just cold. Now you realize they were neglectful. You thought it didn't affect you. Now you see it shaped everything. This is the horror of memory at night. It doesn't just return. It mutates. In the silence of sleep, your mind has no more distractions to guard itself. So the archive opens. The stories you've told yourself to survive begin to decay. And beneath them, a different narrative rises. One where you were not fine, where it did hurt, where the people you protected actually harmed you, where the person you became was a desperate adaptation to trauma, not a conscious choice. You call it insight, but it feels like betrayal, because it means that everything you believed for years was a mask, a myth. And now the truth shows its teeth in a memory you cannot unsee. You wonder why you wake up crying. It's because your past is finally telling the truth, and your heart wasn't ready. You want peace, but peace can't coexist with lies. And your memory has been lying to protect you. Let's go deeper. In trauma psychology, there's a term, dissociative amnesia. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means selectively editing. You remember the facts. You forget the feeling. You remember the event. You forget your own presence in it. This is why trauma isn't what happened. It's what happened without witness. Your body felt everything, but no one was there to validate it. So your mind split the experience into fragments. Now, decades later, those fragments return in the dark, unfiltered, unapproved, undeniable. You lie awake, not because you're thinking too much, but because you're finally feeling accurately, and accuracy hurts. It breaks the illusion that you were never harmed, that they did their best, that you turned out okay. You didn't. You adapted. There's a difference. This is what makes night so cruel. By day, your memories behave. They wear polite costumes. They wait in line. But at night, they riot. They tear off the labels. They demand to be rewritten in full. And you become the unwilling author. You try to resist. You tell yourself it's not real, that memory is unreliable, that it's just a dream. But your body knows. Your tears know. Your breath knows. This is not fantasy. This is the reckoning. You want to sleep. But how do you sleep when your past is rearranging itself in real time? How do you rest when the foundation of who you are is cracking beneath the weight of what you never allowed yourself to admit? Sleep is not just rest. It is reconstruction. It is reprogramming. And sometimes, what the mind builds at night destroys the life you lived by day. You wake up with a new truth, but it costs you the old one. And the grief is unbearable. Not just grief for what happened, but grief for all the years you didn't know it happened. Grief for the child who thought it was normal. Grief for the adult who never questioned it. Grief for the version of you who made peace with lies. And now those lies dissolve in the silence of a sleepless night. There's a reason memory is most vivid during hypnagogia, the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep. In that borderland, the mind softens its control. The unconscious leaks through. You see flashes. You hear voices. You feel things that make no sense but make too much sense. And when you wake, you're not refreshed. You're haunted, because the version of you who experienced that memory is still alive, still asking for justice, still waiting to be heard. You want sleep to erase, but sometimes sleep reveals, and what it reveals can shatter the entire architecture of your identity. Because if that memory is true, then everything that followed was a response to a lie. And who would you be if you weren't constantly adapting to protect that lie? This is the final cruelty of memory. It does not ask for permission. It arrives when you're most defenseless. It unpacks itself like an unwanted guest and rearranges your home without asking. And in the morning you pretend nothing changed, even though you now carry a memory that feels radioactive. So, I'll ask you, if your past rewrote itself tonight, who would you become tomorrow? And if you remembered differently, would your entire self fall apart? And if your past isn't stable, then what makes you so sure your mind is yours at all? The mind that isn't yours, when you realize you've been programmed, you call it your mind. But is it? You speak with confidence, you hold beliefs, you react, you decide. But what if I told you most of what you think, most of what you feel, most of what you believe, was never chosen? It was installed. And now, when you lie awake at night, unable to sleep, you're not fighting rest, you're fighting your programming. From the moment you were born, you were downloaded. Language, morality, gender, God, success, love, shame. Your nervous system didn't write these codes. It absorbed them, not through logic, but through impression, through repetition, through reward and punishment. You didn't learn to think. You learned to conform. You didn't learn who you are. You learned how to be accepted, and now you call that conditioning your personality. Let's go deeper. In the 1960s, Psychologist Albert Bandura ran experiments that would shape modern psychology. The Bobo doll experiment showed that children didn't just mimic actions, they mimicked intent. They didn't just copy behavior, they absorbed worldview. That means long before you knew what you meant, you were already filled with other people's assumptions. Their fears became your caution, their anger became your boundaries, their shame became your silence, and you built a life on these foundations, believing they were yours. They weren't. You lie in bed at night, feeling anxious. But what if that anxiety isn't yours? What if it's inherited? What if your mother's fear of failure now beats in your chest? What if your father's resentment now lives in your bones? What if the culture that told you your worth is in your productivity now whispers in your ear every time you try to rest? This is not your mind. This is a network of borrowed scripts, running like malware. You think you're awake, but you are dreaming someone else's dream. You think you're free, but you are carrying chains that were designed to feel invisible. Even your rebellion is scripted. Even your authenticity is a product. You were trained to express yourself within approved boundaries, within marketable formats, within monetizable identities. You don't know what you are. You only know what you've been allowed to be. So when you lie down and try to sleep, your body resists, because rest requires authenticity, and your system is filled with contradictions. You want peace, but you were taught that peace is laziness. You want self-love, but your religion taught you that self is sin. You want stillness, but your culture taught you that movement is survival. You want to breathe, but your trauma taught you that exhaling is exposure. You are not one person. You are a battleground of competing scripts, and every night, they go to war. This is why silence is so loud, because it's the only time you hear the conflict. All day you move, you consume, you perform, but at night, in the dark, the mask falls, the filters glitch, the programming reveals itself. And what you hear isn't you, it's all the voices you swallowed to survive. You call them thoughts. They're echoes. Your mind repeats what it was taught. And if you were taught to fear, to please, to obey, to perform, then your thoughts are not choices. They're reflexes. You are not thinking. You are reacting. And when you can't sleep, it's not insomnia. It's your mind's inability to find itself beneath the programming. You were told what to want. You were told what to fear. You were told what to feel guilty about. And now, you are punished by thoughts that feel like betrayal, because somewhere deep inside, a voice still exists that remembers something else. A purer you, an unscripted you, a version of you that existed before the teachers, the parents, the institutions, the culture. She is still there, buried, muted, and every time you lie in the dark, she stirs, she whispers. This is not who we are, but the other voices scream louder. Let me ask you this. Who decided what kind of life would make you worthy? Who decided that crying was weakness, that softness was danger, that sleep was indulgent, that you had to earn rest, that love had conditions, that being still was being left behind? You didn't. You inherited it, and you wear it now like skin, like gospel. And when you try to fall asleep, that skin tightens, because it was never yours to begin with. This is not your mind. This is a system, a network of absorbed data, a machine designed to survive the world that built it. But here's the cruelty. The world that built it is gone. You're still running software meant to survive a childhood you no longer live in, a school you no longer attend, a religion you no longer believe, a relationship you escaped, a trauma that no longer controls you, but still programs your every reaction. You haven't updated. You can't rest, because your system doesn't believe rest is safe. And that belief is so old, you've forgotten where it came from. But your body hasn't. You are trying to rest while still running survival scripts. You are trying to fall asleep with a mind full of surveillance. You are trying to dream with a system that doesn't trust what happens when the guard goes down. And your system was built to never let the guard go down. You want to know why you can't sleep? Because you're not home. Not in your body, not in your beliefs, not in your thoughts. You are possessed by culture, by trauma, by memory, by projection, that no one ever taught you how to evict them. You cannot rest in a house where every room belongs to someone else. You cannot sleep when your mind is a museum of other people's fears. You cannot dream when every corridor of your unconscious was decorated by hands that didn't love you. So now I ask you, if every thought you had tonight was not your own, then who, exactly, is it that's trying to fall asleep? And if you stripped away every belief that was installed, what would be left of you? And if even yourself is an illusion, what does it mean to heal something that was never truly yours to begin with? The illusion of healing, when recovery becomes another cage. You say you're trying to heal, you read the books, you listen to the podcasts, you journal, you meditate, you breathe, you perform the rituals of restoration, but why, then, do you still lie awake at night? Why does your body still flinch at calm? Why does your mind recoil from stillness like it's acid? Because maybe, just maybe, you've mistaken performance for transformation. Healing has become another performance, another checklist, another Instagram identity, another system of rules wrapped in soft language, boundaries, self-care, inner child, mindfulness. But the truth, you've made healing into a career. You work on yourself like a project. You optimize your trauma. You gamify your pain. You make your wounds digestible. And yet, you can't sleep, because real healing doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like death. Let's go deeper. You were taught that healing means getting better, that it's a linear climb towards some improved version of yourself. But healing isn't a staircase. It's a spiral, a collapse, a flooding of everything you've kept buried. To truly heal is to be wrecked. To feel the grief you postponed, to rage over the betrayals you minimized, to let the memories rot in your gut until they rise as truth. But that kind of healing doesn't sell. So the world gave you something else, the wellness industry. This is the paradox. You escaped the performance of productivity only to adopt the performance of healing. You traded achiever for seeker. You wear yourself like armor. You learn the terms. You say all the right things. But deep down, nothing feels different, because you're not healing. You're managing. You're trying to make your pain aesthetically pleasing. You're trying to be lovable in your brokenness. You're trying to be the kind of wounded that doesn't scare people away. And in doing so, you abandon the real work. Because real work is ugly. It's not brandable. It doesn't come with a certificate. It's not guided meditations. It's not positive affirmations. It's lying awake at night with your heart in your throat as your nervous system screams through years of silent agony. You want to heal, but healing means becoming someone else. Not adding skills, not gaining knowledge, but burning. Becoming unrecognizable to the version of you that survived by pretending. Then no one tells you this, that healing will ruin your life. It will cost you relationships. It will make you intolerable to the people who benefited from your silence. It will isolate you from communities built on suppression. It will shatter your routines. It will make you question the God you were taught to worship. It will tear the roof off the house your ego built. And until you're ready to lose all that, you're not healing. You're negotiating. This is why your body won't rest. Because deep down, you know you're still performing. You say you love yourself, but only on the days you feel in control. You say you're setting boundaries, but only with people you're not afraid to lose. You say you're healing, but only as long as it doesn't make you too ugly, too angry, too inconvenient. But healing doesn't care about your aesthetic. It's not curated. It's not pretty. It's primal, chaotic, terrifying. Then your insomnia is not a failure. It's your body screaming at the mask that healing handed you, because the new mask still smothers, even if it's made of gentler fabric. Here's the hidden truth. You can't heal within the same system that made you sick, and the system of healing you've adopted. It still demands performance, still rewards appearances, still punishes rest. You measure your worth by how healed you appear. You panic when your triggers return. You shame yourself for regressing. You obsess over progress. But healing is not a straight line. It is a fractal, a recursive unraveling. And when you lie awake at 3 a.m., it's not because you're broken. It's because healing is working. It's just not working the way you were told. Your insomnia is sacred. It's the part of you that refuses to be fooled by the costume of growth. It's the nervous system calling bullshit on your curated piece. It's the soul rising through the cracks, begging for truth, not polish. You can take all the supplements you want, read all the junk you want. Quote, Gabor mate. Follow trauma therapists on Instagram. Do breath work. light incense, but none of it will matter until you admit this one devastating truth. You've been trying to heal without losing control. And that's not healing. That's preservation. You want to sleep. Then ask yourself, what part of me still believes I must look healed in order to deserve peace? And what if sleep only comes after the mask of recovery has been burned? But if even healing is performance, what happens when love itself becomes another form of control? The weaponization of love, when intimacy becomes surveillance. You were told love would make you whole. That connection would soothe you. That intimacy would finally let you rest. But then why do you feel most unsafe when someone gets close? Why do your hands shake at vulnerability? Why does your chest tighten at affection? Why does sleep feel hardest when there's someone next to you? Because maybe what you were taught was love, was never love. Maybe it was control dressed in care. They said love was attention, but only when you were good. They said love was safety, but only if you obeyed. They said love was touch, but only when it served them. They said love was loyalty, but only if you agreed. So now when someone says, "I love you," your nervous system scans it like a contract, looking for loopholes, looking for traps, because the body remembers, and the body is no fool. Let's go deeper. In developmental psychology, there is a brutal reality. Children do not choose love, they choose attachment, because attachment is survival. And when love and attachment conflict, the child will sacrifice truth, autonomy, even dignity just to stay connected. You weren't loved for who you were. You were loved for who you could become to make someone else comfortable. That's not love. That's adaptation. And now, as an adult, you keep adapting. You shapeshift, you shrink, you perform, and then you wonder why intimacy exhausts you. It's because you were never taught to rest in love, only to work for it. So even in your relationships you stay awake, you monitor yourself, you analyze every word, you adjust your body language, you replay conversations, desperate to avoid mistakes. You are not loved, you are auditioning, and the bed becomes a stage. Even the silence between two bodies feels like an interrogation. This is why you can't sleep next to them, because sleep requires letting go, and you were taught that letting go means being replaced. You were taught that if you stop performing, they will stop choosing you. So you stay alert, even in intimacy, even in rest. You stay useful, pleasant, attractive, safe. But none of that is peace, it's surveillance. You've made love into a prison, and your partner is the warden, even if they don't know it. You say you crave closeness, but you recoil when it arrives. You say you want emotional intimacy, but when someone sees your fear, you flood with shame. Because somewhere deep in you, closeness has become code for danger. You equate vulnerability with betrayal, softness with exposure, dependence with humiliation. That's not a glitch. That's a scar. You want to trust, but trust was never modeled for you. You want to sleep in their arms, but your body curls away, because skin to skin feels like a spotlight, not a sanctuary. You want to relax into love, but love has become another battlefield. A place where you must always prove you're worth keeping. This is the weaponization of love. It's when care becomes currency, when affection is doled out in response to compliance, when "I love you" really means stay in line. And even if your partner now is kind, the blueprint is set, so your body still behaves like you're being watched, judged, measured. You do not rest, you perform. And when the performance ends, you lie awake. This is why sex doesn't heal you. Because after the climax, you feel the emptiness, not because they don't care, but because the contact didn't quiet your nervous system, it activated it. Because deep inside, you believe touch is conditional, that softness is a test, that to be seen is to be endangered. So you tense, you smile, you fake closeness, you chase love like a fugitive running from the one place they claim to want to arrive. Let me ask you this, do you feel safer when you're alone? Not because solitude is joyful, but because no one is watching. No one to impress, no one to perform for, no one to accidentally disappoint. Isn't that strange? You seek love for safety, but find safety only in isolation. That's not intimacy. That's residue from a life of weaponized affection. So when you lie next to them in bed, your body does not rest. It calculates. Did I say too much? Was I too emotional? Did I ask for too much? Do they still want me? And that spiral. It burns away sleep like fire through parchment. You become your own jailer, policing your needs, censoring your softness, and the bed becomes a battleground where your fear fights your longing. Here's the final cruelty. You can't sleep because you're still trying to prove you're lovable, and until you believe it unconditionally, no amount of affection will ever soothe you, because you will always suspect that love is a performance review, and you will always fear that rest is the moment you get replaced. So now I ask you, if you stopped being useful, would they still choose you? And if you weren't impressive, pretty, calm, or careful, would love still arrive, or would it leave? And if the answer is uncertain, how could you ever fall asleep next to it? And if love has become surveillance, what does that make your relationship with your own body? The body you were taught to abandon. When your skin becomes a stranger, you speak about your mind like it's you. You analyze it, you observe it, you try to fix it, but your body, you treat it like a thing you carry, a vehicle, a costume, a problem to solve. And that's why you can't sleep, because sleep doesn't happen in the mind. Sleep happens in the body, and you are no longer home there. You were taught early that your body was dangerous, or shameful, or irrelevant, too big, too loud, too fragile, too female, too black, too queer, too emotional. Your body was never just allowed to be a body. It had to be managed, controlled, silenced. So you left. You moved your awareness into your head. You became thought, strategy, smile, and now your body is nothing but a nervous system in rebellion, tight, trembling, aching, exhausted. You don't live in your body, you battle it. This is why you can't sleep, because sleep requires presence, and presence lives in the body. You need to feel safe in your skin, but your skin remembers everything: where the hands were, where the violence landed, where the rejection sank in. You think the past is over, but your tissue still flinches, your breath still hesitates, your stomach still knots. You think you're calm, but your shoulders say otherwise. Your clenched jaw betrays you. You are not calm. You are disconnected. Let's go deeper. In somatic therapy, there's a concept called body armor. It's not metaphor. It's real muscular tension. When a child is shamed, they contract. When a person is traumatized, their fascia stiffens. When emotion is unexpressed, it lodges itself in the body. And if you never learn to release that tension, it becomes who you are. Not because it's natural, but because it's practiced. You aren't just anxious, you are trained to stay tense, and sleep cannot enter a body at war with itself. So you try to relax, you stretch, you breathe, you scan, but the moment your awareness moves toward your body, something flinches. You feel disgust, you feel grief, you feel nothing, because you've spent years dissociating from the vessel you live in. You were taught to abandon your body, and now that you need it to rest, it does not trust you, because you've only ever touched it to judge it, to fix it, to hide it, not to love it. You stare at the ceiling and wonder why nothing works. The melatonin, the meditation, the rituals, but your body isn't listening, because your body was taught it's only safe when it disappears, but when it's perfect, thin, still, pleasing. And now it refuses to let go, because letting go has never been safe. This is the tragedy. You are told your mind is the problem, but your body holds the wound. Your anxiety is in your gut, your shame is in your chest, your grief is in your hips, your panic lives in your breath, and every night they knock on the door. But you keep trying to solve it all from the neck up. You cannot think your way into rest. You have to feel your way back into your body, and that terrifies you, because being in your body means feeling what it remembers, and it remembers everything. It remembers the night you were touched without tenderness, the moment your voice was punished, the years you didn't eat, the days you starved for affection, the mornings you dressed it like armor, hoping no one would see your shame. You think sleep is what you need, but your body needs something deeper: reconciliation. Say you love yourself, but when was the last time you felt your own skin without judgment? When was the last time you listened to its pain without rushing to cover it with productivity? When was the last time you let it rest without demanding it look better the next day? You treat your body like an enemy, and enemies don't fall asleep together. Here's the final cruelty. You want peace, but you never learned how to exist in yourself without punishment. Even rest feels like a betrayal of the culture that taught you your worth is in your doing, so your body doesn't relax. It waits, it watches, it holds itself up like a soldier, long after the war has ended. And now the war is your identity. Let me ask you, when did your body become the one thing you were never allowed to feel safe inside? And if sleep requires surrender, but your body equates surrender with being harmed, how could you ever expect it to comply? You cannot rest in a place you've spent a lifetime abandoning. You cannot fall asleep in a body you've only ever silenced. You cannot heal what you are still afraid to feel. So now I ask you, if your body spoke tonight, not through words, but through insomnia, what would it be trying to tell you? And if you truly listened, would you still want to sleep? But if your body was never truly yours, what happens when even your pain begins to feel artificial? The simulation of suffering, when your pain becomes performance. You say you're in pain, but somewhere inside, you wonder if it's real. You lie in the dark, the ache sharp, the thoughts chaotic, the body wired, but a voice whispers, "Am I faking it?" That's the voice they gave you, not to protect you, but to keep you quiet. Because if you start questioning your own suffering, you'll never ask for help. You'll never set boundaries. You'll never revolt. And that's exactly what they wanted. They told you, you're too sensitive. You're too dramatic. You're overthinking. You're imagining things. You're being selfish. So you learned to doubt your pain. You learned to apologize for it. You learned to shrink it, smile through it, sanitize it. And now, when you finally lie still, when the world goes quiet and the pain grows loud, you start gaslighting yourself. You wonder if it's real. You wonder if it's enough. You wonder if you're enough. Because somewhere along the line, suffering became something you had to justify. Let's go deeper. You don't just feel pain. You evaluate it. You weigh it against other stories. You compare it to trauma hierarchies. You measure it in likes, in visibility, in sympathy. You ask, is my pain valid? Is it dramatic? Do I have the right to hurt? But pain isn't democratic. It doesn't wait its turn. It doesn't ask for permission. Pain just is. But you've been taught that unless your pain is impressive, it's not real. So you perform it. You make it coherent, digestible, narrated. You tell your story in ways that make others comfortable. You avoid the mess, the rage, the contradictions. You make your pain palatable, and in doing so you turn it into a simulation. Now you lie awake, not just in pain, but in performance of pain. You rehearse how you'd explain it to a therapist. You imagine what you'd say in a post. You filter it through language. And that very act, that self-surveillance keeps you from resting, because you are not in your pain. You are watching yourself feel it. That's dissociation disguised as healing. You think but you're just self-monitoring. You've learned to narrate your trauma before you've even fully felt it. You say things like, I know where this comes from. I understand the root of this. This is a trauma response. But what if that knowledge is another shield? What if all your insight is a way to avoid sinking? Because to sink into pain, to really let it take over, means risking madness, chaos, dismantling. And your culture doesn't allow that. So you control the narrative, and control is the enemy of sleep. This is why you can't rest. Because you are stuck in a loop of surveillance, watching yourself suffer, judging yourself for suffering, explaining your suffering, but never letting it just be, never letting it erupt, never letting it shake the walls. Because you were taught that rage is ugly, that grief is manipulative, that despair is weak, that emotional honesty is dangerous. So you perform pain like a role, like a monologue, like a memoir, and sleep cannot enter a theater. You long for rest, but rest requires collapse. And you've built your entire identity around staying upright, so your pain becomes curated, visible only when it's useful, when it makes you relatable, when it earns validation. But that's not healing. That's content. And you're not a person anymore. You're a brand of suffering, even in the dark. You rehearse, you practice what it looks like to fall apart without ever actually doing it. This is why your nervous system never settles, because it knows the truth. You're lying, not about the pain itself, but about your relationship to it. You say you want to be free, but you're addicted to the identity the pain gives you. You say you want peace, but peace would mean giving up the sympathy, the understanding, the attention, the certainty. And without all that, who are you? Who are you without the suffering? Would anyone still see you? Would you still see you? Here's the brutal question. Have you made pain your personality? Not because you chose to, but because it was the only way to feel real. Because no one saw you enjoy. No one witnessed your ease. No one stayed unless you were hurting. So now, you hurt, even when you don't need to, because at least pain makes you visible. And yet, you're tired. You're tired of curating your grief. Tired of proving your wounds. Tired of narrating everything like a podcast episode. Tired of hurting in a way that gets applause but never sleep, because performance is exhausting. Even when the stage is in your own mind, especially then. So now, I ask you, if no one ever validated your pain again, would you still feel it? And if you couldn't tell the story, would it still matter? And if not, then was it ever pain at all? Or just a performance you were taught to call truth? But if even your pain has been colonized, what happens when your silence is no longer your own? The silence that isn't yours, when your quiet was manufactured. You lie in bed, silent, no words, no movement, no tears, just the low hum of everything, unspoken. But that silence, it isn't peace, it's paralysis. You weren't born silent. You were made that way, conditioned, trained, programmed, and now your silence doesn't soothe, it suffocates from your earliest memories. Silence was survival. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't talk back. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us. Don't feel too much. Don't be too much. So you didn't. You bit your tongue until your thoughts turned into ulcers. You buried your feelings so deep, you mistook the ache for personality. You silenced yourself so well. You forgot what your voice sounded like, and now, you can't sleep because the noise inside is nowhere else to go. Let's go deeper. In behavioral psychology, there's a term called learned helplessness. It was discovered by Martin Seligman in the 1960s. Dogs were subjected to random electric shocks. Some could escape. Others COULDN, single quotes T. Later, even when escape was possible, those who had learned they were helpless, stayed. They didn't try. They didn't move. They froze. That's what silence is for you now. A trauma response dressed as compliance. You don't speak up, not because you don't know what to say, but because your nervous system doesn't believe words will help. So when your thoughts race at night, when your emotions scream behind your ribs, you stay silent, still, obedient, because you've learned that expression equals danger. You were punished for truth. You were ignored for honesty. You were shamed for needing . And now, you punish yourself in advance by swallowing everything before it forms. Your insomnia is not overthinking, it's overholding. You're not spinning out. You're holding in years of unsaid things, unfelt feelings, unprocessed betrayals. You don't speak because your silence became the only thing that kept you from falling apart in public. But what if that silence is what's breaking you now? You want to rest, but silence won't let you, because this silence doesn't heal. It haunts. It echoes with the sound of everything you never said. I'm not okay. That hurt me. I needed you. Please don't go. Please leave me alone. I don't forgive you. I was a child. I didn't deserve that. I'm scared. I hate what happened. I hate who it made me. But you said none of it. And now the silence you once used to survive keeps you locked in a body that won't sleep. This is the final irony. The world praises your calm, your maturity, your emotional regulation, but they don't know you're dying in that stillness because you learned to perform peace. Instead of demanding justice, you learned to smile instead of scream. You learned to self-destruct silently, so no one else would feel uncomfortable. You became the perfect survivor, and perfect survivors never sleep. They stay watchful, polished, pleasant, even when they're burning. Let me ask you, when did silence become your currency? When did you learn that being palatable was safer than being real? When did you start exchanging authenticity for approval? You don't cry. You don't scream. You don't rage. Because somewhere in your story, those things cost you love, so you pay with silence instead. And the debt has become unbearable. You can't sleep because your body is full of words, unspoken apologies, unfinished boundaries, truths. You ache, not from lack of rest, but from emotional constipation. Your heart is constipated. Your voice is constipated. Your nervous system is bloated with the weight of things you've never let move through you. And now your insomnia isn't a medical condition. It's an emotional traffic jam. Everything trying to exit, everything being blocked. You say nothing, but your body says everything. It twitches, it tightens, it trembles, it aches, it speaks in language older than language. And every night, it begs for release. But you offer it silence. Again. Because even now, in the dark, with no one watching, you don't feel safe being loud. You don't rest. You rehearse. You rehearse being okay. You rehearse being gentle. You rehearse being spiritually evolved. But silence does not mean peace. Stillness does not mean truth. Quiet does not mean healed. Sometimes the loudest trauma is the one that never found a voice. So now I ask you, if you screamed tonight, would the world actually end? And if it didn't, would you still choose to be silent? Or have you made stillness your prison, because the door was easier to stare at than to walk through? And if your silence isn't yours, then who taught you to fear your own voice? The voice you were trained to fear, when speaking becomes a threat to survival. You weren't born quiet. You screamed when you arrived. Your lungs knew how to claim space. Your mouth knew how to demand care. You were a storm, unfiltered, raw need, unapologetic sound, a body without shame. And then they began to teach you otherwise. Too loud, too emotional, too much, too difficult, too sensitive. They didn't teach you to listen. They taught you to doubt your right to speak. You learned that being heard was dangerous, that your feelings were inconvenient, that your needs were burdens. So you adjusted. You dimmed your light. You swallowed your truth. You monitored your tone, not to grow, but to survive. And now, you lie in bed, full of words, but unable to say any of them, because your nervous system has memorized this lesson. Silence is safer than truth. Let's go deeper. In childhood development, the social engagement system is how we bond. We cry to be fed. We shout when something's wrong. We speak to belong. But when that system is punished, when your voice is met with disapproval, mockery, or abandonment, you learn to equate self-expression with rejection. You stop reaching out. You stop crying for help. You stop asking for what you need. And eventually you stop believing you deserve to be heard at all. So now, even in adulthood, your throat tightens when emotion rises. You tremble when asked to express what you feel. You downplay. You joke. You intellectualize. But never, ever, do you just say it. Because honesty still feels like danger, like betrayal, like the moment the room turns cold and everyone leaves. So you stay quiet, even when it's killing you. You call it shyness. You call it stoicism. You call it peace. But let's name it for what it is. Fear. Fear of being too much. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being punished for existing in full volume. And that fear is wired so deeply into your being that even your own internal voice now sounds like someone else's criticism. This is why you can't sleep, because your voice is still awake. It wants to speak. It wants to yell. It wants to name the things that were done to you, but you won't let it. You hush it like a child in a public place. Not now. Don't make noise. You'll embarrass us. But the voice is not a child anymore. It is your truth. And it is tired of waiting for permission, so it keeps you awake. It paces in your mind. It drafts monologues. It replays arguments you never had. It writes letters you'll never send, because it wants out, and you won't open the door. You were taught that to be loved, you had to be agreeable, that to be safe, you had to be quiet, that to be enough, you had to be small. And that training runs so deep that now your own truth sounds like a threat. You don't trust your voice, because they didn't, and you made their discomfort your religion now. When you feel something strong, you question yourself. Am I overreacting? Am I being selfish? Will they hate me for saying this? So you don't say it. You don't express it. You don't release it. You sleep next to someone who doesn't know you're dying. You work a job where your ideas rot in silence. You nod through conversations that make your skin crawl, and then you wonder why your body screams. When the lights go out, you weren't taught to speak. You were trained to conform. Your tongue learned the choreography of politeness. Your face mastered the art of neutrality. Your spine bent to accommodate others' comfort. But the truth, Your silence is not peace. It's learned obedience. They didn't just suppress your voice. They rewrote your instincts. You apologize when you're hurt. You explain your emotions, like they're crimes. You smile when you're boiling, and then you wonder why your jaw aches, why your throat burns, why your chest feels heavy. It's not anxiety. It's unspoken truth, fermenting. You want to heal. Then let me ask you this. What have you never said out loud? Not because you couldn't, but because you believed it would destroy everything. What truths live in your bones that have never made it to your lips? What grief have you camouflaged with cleverness? What rage have you diluted into passive sentences? What boundaries did you bury under politeness? This is why your body won't sleep, because your voice is suffocating. And silence has become its coffin. You were never meant to be agreeable. You were meant to be honest, but honesty cost you too much. So you traded it for survival, and now you lie in the dark begging for rest, while your truth claws at your insides like a prisoner in its own home. So now I ask you, if you said exactly what you needed to tonight, what would you lose? And if the answer is everything, then what have you been sleeping beside all these years? And if your voice was stolen, what happens when the world convinces you your feelings were never real to begin with? The feelings you were told not to trust. When emotion becomes evidence against you, you lie in bed, drowning in emotion, grief, anger, shame, longing. But instead of letting it pass through you, you start to interrogate it. Is this justified? Am I being irrational? Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's all in my head. Because somewhere in your life, you learned the most violent lesson a human can absorb. Your feelings are unreliable. You were told to calm down before you even knew why you were upset. You were told to smile before you knew what joy felt like. You were asked what's wrong with you, instead of what happened to you. So you internalized it, the guilt, the confusion, the idea that if you felt something it must mean something was wrong with you. Not the situation, not the relationship, not the trauma. You. This is how emotional gaslighting begins. Not always by abusers, sometimes by culture, by institutions, by parents who themselves never learned how to feel, by peers who mocked vulnerability, by media that told you composure is strength. So your inner world became a courtroom. Every emotion must defend itself. Every feeling must pass through logic. Every tear is subject to cross-examination. You became both witness and prosecutor of your own nervous system. Let's go deeper. In neuroscience, emotions are verbal. They originate in the limbic system, an ancient primal part of the brain. They are not thoughts. They are chemical truths, signals, data, messages. But you were taught to treat them like enemies, like weakness, like noise. So you began to silence your own internal guidance system. And now, when emotion arrives, you freeze, you edit, you analyze it to death, because feeling it directly is too dangerous. This is why you can't sleep, because emotion doesn't disappear. It just waits. It waits until the room goes dark, until the distractions are gone, until your inner critic falls silent, and then it rises like fog from a forgotten swamp. You don't feel too much. You feel exactly what you never gave yourself permission to feel, and the body remembers what the mind rejected. So now your chest tightens, your stomach churns, your breath shortens, your skin crawls. You think it's anxiety, but it's emotion, begging to be believed. You've trained yourself to distrust your own internal world. You tell yourself, I'm being dramatic. I shouldn't be upset about this. Other people have it worse. I'm just tired. And every time you say those things, you abandon yourself. You become the very voice that wounded you, and your inner child, your nervous system, your emotional body. They hear it loud and clear. You don't believe me. So they scream louder, in the only ways they know how. Through panic, through insomnia, through compulsions, through chronic tension, through despair that makes no logical sense, because logic was never the language of healing. Only emotion knows the way home. But you've made emotion into a crime. You ask your grief to be quiet. You ask your rage to be polite. You ask your shame to be useful. You ask your longing to be small, and in doing so, you make your humanity unbearable. So you numb, you intellectualize, you distract, you dissociate, you call it regulation, but it's just avoidance in spiritual clothing. You want rest. Then stop demanding your emotions justify their existence. Stop grading your grief. Stop pathologizing your pain. Stop asking if it's okay to feel what you already feel, because that doubt is the root of your exhaustion. It's not the feeling itself. It's the internal war you wage against the feeling. That's what drains you. That's what keeps you awake. You are not too much. You were surrounded by people who were not enough to hold you, and now you've become one of them, unwilling to hold yourself, because to feel deeply in a world that shames depth is to be called unstable. But maybe what the world calls instability is actually clarity. Maybe what they call oversensitivity is actually presence. Maybe what they call drama is just truth that can't be ignored anymore. You don't sleep because your feelings don't trust you, because every time they visit, you interrogate them, you try to logic them out of existence. You judge them by how easily they can be explained to others. But healing doesn't need explanation. It needs witness, and you have been the judge when you were supposed to be the sanctuary. So, now I ask you, what if every feeling you ever silenced was right all along? What if your emotions weren't the problem, but the proof of what you lived through, the proof of what you lost, the proof of what you never received? And if that's true, then what does that make all the years you spent suppressing them? And if even your emotions are no longer yours, what happens when your dreams begin to lie? The dreams that deceive you, when the unconscious becomes a mask. You thought dreams would tell the truth, that when the masks fell, when the day dissolved, your unconscious would finally speak without filters. But what if your dreams are lying, too? What if even in sleep, you can't escape the performance? What if your subconscious, like your conscious self, has been trained to keep you safe by keeping you deluded? You wake up and say, that was a strange dream, but you mean that was too painful to make sense of. You write it down, try to interpret the symbols, Google meanings, assign metaphors, but the core remains buried, unreachable, because even your dreaming mind is afraid of what it knows. Even your unconscious edits for safety. Let's go deeper. Freud believed dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, that what we suppress during the day leaks through at night, in code, in disguise, in fragmented story. But repression doesn't stop at the threshold of sleep. It burrows deeper. It distorts your dreams. Don't just reveal they are EFRACT. They give you versions of your truth you can tolerate. Not what happened, but what almost happened. What could have been. What should have been. What you still wish were possible. Dreams aren't honesty. They're hope, corrupted by fear. You want rest, but your dreams give you simulations. Dead loved ones, alive again. Abusers kind again. Strangers who understand you. Situations where you finally win. You wake up with a phantom ache, a grief shaped like a wish, a craving for a reality that never existed. You say it was just a dream, but your nervous system doesn't believe that. Because the emotion was real, the comfort, real, the loss, fresh. You weren't healed in sleep. You were sedated by fantasy. And the crash is devastating. You want your dreams to deliver you truth, but you forget that the unconscious is not pure. It is not untouched. It has been shaped by trauma, by repetition, by culture, by narrative. It has been colonized. So now, even your dream world is curated. You don't dream what's deepest. You dream what's safest. And sometimes what's safest is a version of the past where you were loved correctly. This is why your dreams exhaust you, because instead of releasing you, they trap you in alternate timelines. They replay, they rewrite, they tease, and you wake up carrying the emotional residue of a lie that still felt better than your reality. So now you can't rest, because your dreams give you just enough illusion to stay addicted to what never was. This is not healing. This is emotional fantasy. It's coping in reverse. It's trauma with a filter. It's grief disguised as potential. And it makes your mornings feel like morning, because you weren't just sleeping, you were being shown everything you're still aching for. You want to dream of peace, but you dream of possibility instead. The ex who apologizes, the parent who finally sees you, the life where you said the thing you never said, the home you never had, the version of you that feels whole. But these aren't dreams, they're seductions, and your body, betrayed again by sleep, wakes up with the hangover of what could never be. So now you lie awake, afraid to dream, afraid not to, because sleep no longer offers honesty, it offers manipulation. Your unconscious has become another system designed to protect you from collapse by feeding you curated emotional hallucinations. But here's the cost: you never actually grieve the truth. You just rehearsed better versions of the lie. Let me ask you, how many of your dreams are actually memory? How many are wishful rewrites? And how long have you been escaping into those reruns instead of facing what really happened? You think dreams are healing you, but they might be preserving your illusions. And illusions are heavy. They're soft when you're inside them, but unbearable when you wake. You carry that weight into your day, into your decisions, into your relationships, still chasing that feeling you only feel in sleep, still hoping someone in reality will finally play the part you've rehearsed in your unconscious 1,000 nights over. You don't want peace, you want familiarity, even if it's fake. And your dreams know this, so they give you familiarity wrapped in fantasy. They keep you addicted to emotional architecture that never supported you. They keep you orbiting ghosts with prettier faces. You're not dreaming, you're negotiating. Every night you make deals with your own psyche. Let me feel okay, even if it isn't true. And the unconscious, ever loyal, gives you what you asked for, a facsimile of resolution, a taste of repair. But the damage remains, because nothing changed, except the angle of the illusion. So now I ask you, if your dreams stopped lying to you, would you be strong enough to see what they've been hiding? And if you finally saw the unfiltered truth, could you ever fall asleep again? And if dreams aren't real, what happens when you begin to question the waking world? 2. The waking world is the lie. When reality becomes the deepest sleep, you open your eyes, but are you really awake? You brush your teeth, check your phone, reply politely, answer with a smile, but something feels off, muted, scripted, as if you're playing a part that was written long before you had a say. Because you don't live in the world, you live in a simulation of meaning, a waking dream designed to keep you busy enough to forget how tired you are. Not just tired in your body, but tired in your soul. You think sleep is the dream, that when you lie down, your mind begins to create illusions. But what if it's the opposite? What if this is the illusion? What if waking life is just a more stable kind of dream? One built by institutions, by language, by memory, by time, by money. You don't wake into freedom. You wake into conditioning. Into a calendar, into a clock, into an identity you didn't choose, into a body you don't inhabit, into systems you serve but never question, and you call it reality. Let's go deeper. Neuroscience tells us that perception is a hallucination, not a metaphor, a literal process. Your brain does not record reality. It predicts it, it gathers partial data and fills in the rest. It constructs a model, then edits what you see to match that model. In other words, what you experience as real is a controlled fantasy, and most of it is inherited. You believe what you were taught to believe. You see what you expect to see. You feel what you were allowed to feel. The world you live in is not the world. It's a rendering, and that rendering is full of lies. You were told rest is laziness. You were told work is virtue. You were told comfort must be earned. You were told identity is fixed. You were told success equals safety. You were told to grow up and behave. You were told to stay small, stay quiet, stay functional. You were told until you stopped asking. And now, you perform reality like a sleepwalker, performs walking, eyes open, but deeply, terrifyingly unconscious. This is why you're so tired, because reality doesn't give you energy. It takes it. Every day, you spend your vitality maintaining the illusion, smiling when you want to scream, producing when you want to pause, saying I'm fine when you're vanishing inside. Your life is a theater, and you are both actor and audience, too committed to the role to notice the stage is crumbling. You can't sleep because the performance doesn't end when the lights go out. It continues in your head, it continues in your posture, it continues in the dreams shaped by the scripts you've rehearsed since childhood. Even your rest is rehearsal, and you wonder why your body doesn't believe it. You're not awake, you're compliant, you're coherent, you're legible to systems that reward obedience and punish consciousness. You're tired not from exertion, but from pretending you're alive in a world that deadens you daily, and deep down, you know it. That's the hum beneath your insomnia, the static under your skin, the sense that none of this is quite real, that you are trapped in a narrative that isn't yours, that you are playing a character you didn't cast, and the more you perform, the more you disappear. You crave sleep, because you think it will free you. But how can it, when even your dreams are shaped by this same machine? You are not resting. You are buffering. You are resetting your role just enough to survive another day of simulated aliveness. And that simulation has rules, rules you never voted for, rules you never questioned, rules that shape your hunger, your rest, your self-worth. You sleep to recover from pretending, then wake to pretend again, and the cycle continues. You think you're tired because you're doing too much. But what if you're tired because you're not doing anything real, not expressing, not grieving, not living, just mimicking life with the movements you were taught? Eat, work, scroll, laugh, nod, sleep, repeat. But somewhere beneath it all, you are still, you are watching, and you are screaming. This is the final horror. You can't wake up because waking up means letting it all fall apart. The job, the relationship, the goals, the habits, the persona. Waking up means becoming a stranger to the world you once called home, and that's terrifying. So you choose fatigue, you choose the blur, you choose sedation over rebellion, because rebellion would require you to feel everything, but still, the truth leaks through in your insomnia, in your panic attacks, in the gut feeling that your life is somehow happening without you. You are not awake. You are watching yourself sleepwalk through meaning, and your soul, whatever's left of it, is begging for collapse, not a breakdown, a breakthrough. So now I ask you, if everything you believe is a dream someone else taught you to call real, then what, exactly, would it mean to finally wake up? And if waking up costs you your place in the world, would you still choose to open your eyes? And if the world is asleep, what does that make the voices inside you that keep trying to scream? The voices that were buried alive when your inner world becomes a mass grave. You tell yourself you're alone, that the silence in your head means stillness, that you've matured, grown, evolved. But listen closely. Beneath the stillness, there are voices. They don't shout. Not anymore. They used to, now they whisper. And the whisper is worse, because you've trained yourself not to hear them. These aren't hallucinations. They're memories. They're fragments. They're parts of you, real, alive, sentient, that were locked in the basement of your psyche because their truth made others uncomfortable. The part that raged, the part that cried too loudly, the part that asked for more than was offered, the part that wanted to run away, the part that hated your parents, the part that wanted to burn it all down, the part that felt ugly, the part that wasn't kind, were all real, and you exiled them to survive. And now, they haunt your sleepless nights. You weren't taught how to integrate. You were taught how to silence. You learned that only certain versions of you were welcome. The calm one, the productive one, the accommodating one, the grateful one. So, you learned to amputate yourself emotionally, to bury the parts that didn't fit the performance. And now your body is a mass grave of forgotten selves. And some nights, they try to claw their way back to the surface. Let's go deeper. In internal family systems therapy, they call them exiles, the parts of you that hold unbearable pain, buried to protect the system, isolated, so the functional you can move through the world. But exiles don't die. They just wait, and they communicate through symptom, through anxiety, through insomnia, through inexplicable dread, through dreams that leave you shaking. You can't remember the story, but your body does, your nervous system does. Your gut does. And they are begging you to listen. But listening would mean letting the past speak again. And the past doesn't whisper. It howls, it convulses, it burns. It rips through the walls you've built. So instead, you stay awake, locked, in shallow breath, telling yourself it's just a bad night. But this isn't a night. This isn't uprising. You call it a panic attack. But it's a reunion. Every part of you that was silenced is showing up at once, demanding a seat at the table, and because you've never let them speak, they don't arrive calm. They arrive furious, wounded, desperate, like children abandoned in a fire, and you are the only one who can open the door. You don't rest because rest means softness, and softness means vulnerability. And vulnerability is when the voices get louder, so you stay in motion, you stay scrolling, you stay managing. Because if you slow down, if you stop, you might hear the one voice you're most afraid of. The one that says, I wasn't okay, and no one noticed. That's the part that breaks you. Not the anger, not the fear, but the grief. The pure, unexplainable grief of not being held when it mattered most. The grief of betraying yourself to be loved. The grief of disappearing to stay safe. And grief is not poetic, it's raw, ugly, animal, so you buried it. And now it's clawing through the floorboards. Every time your head touches the pillow. This is why your healing feels incomplete. Because you never invited everyone. You tried to grow while leaving your pain in the basement. You tried to evolve without rage. You tried to rest without grief. You tried to love yourself without acknowledging the parts of you still secretly hate. You tried to become whole without remembering what you buried to survive. But there is no healing without reunion, and no rest without recognition. You want peace. But peace is not the absence of chaos, it's the presence of every voice, held in compassion, allowed to speak. Even the ones that ruin your image, even the ones that want to scream, even the ones that contradict everything you say during the day. You are not one person, you are a choir, and the insomnia is the sound of voices rehearsing without a conductor. You are not broken, you are incomplete, split, exiled from yourself, and every time you ignore the shaking in your hands, the nausea in your gut, the ache in your heart, you're telling those parts they still aren't welcome, so they speak louder and louder and louder, until your nights become battlegrounds of noise inside a body that only ever wanted to be whole. So now I ask you, if you finally let them speak, what would they say? And if you allowed every part of you a seat at the table, who would you become? And if the answer terrifies you, is it because you fear your pain, or because you fear the power that's buried underneath it? And if even your fragmentation is by design, what if the systems around you needed you to forget who you really are? That amnesia was the point, when forgetting becomes a survival strategy for systems, not souls. You think you forgot because it was too painful, too traumatic, too overwhelming. But what if you forgot because you were trained to, not by accident, not by failure, but by design? You were not supposed to remember, not your wholeness, not your rage, not your instincts, not your hunger, not your story. Because if you remembered, you'd stop playing your role, you'd stop obeying, you'd stop buying what they sold, you'd stop participating in a system that depends on your amnesia to survive. You lie in bed and think, I don't know who I am anymore. But what if that's not a personal crisis? What if it's the intended outcome of a culture that survives by severing you from yourself? What if your lostness is not a flaw but a feature, because a fragmented person is profitable, a docile person is manageable, a tired person is compliant, a numb person is easy to feed, sell to, push around you, forgot, because remembering would make you dangerous? Let's go deeper. Modern trauma research tells us that memory isn't just lost, it's repressed, it hides, it camouflages, it disguises itself as personality, as preference, as instinct. But cultural trauma does more than repress, it rewrites. You were taught to forget your needs, forget your body, forget your lineage, forget your fire. In exchange, you were given roles, labels, performance, metrics. You were taught to remember only what made you useful, not what made you whole. This is why you lie awake at night, unable to rest, because your soul is trying to remember you. Keep replaying moments, asking questions, chasing feelings that don't make sense. You call it anxiety, but it's resistance. Resistance to forgetting. Something in you still knows, still remembers the life you were meant to live, the self you were born with, and it will not let you sleep until you come back. You were born wild, free, untamed, but that terrified them, so they gave you scripts, they gave you rules, they gave you numbers, they gave you sins, they gave you grades, they gave you mirrors that lied. And with every year that passed, you disappeared. Not all at once, in pieces, your play, your pleasure, your voice, your curiosity, your no, gone, one by one, until all that remained was a shell trained to survive. but not to live. You didn't lose yourself. You were erased. Erased by parents who needed you to be easy, by schools that needed you to be quiet, by churches that needed you to be ashamed, by workplaces that needed you to be replaceable, by cultures that needed you to be digestible. And now, you lie in bed trying to convince yourself this is normal, but it isn't. This is not what life was supposed to feel like. You can't sleep because your body is trying to restore what was stolen. And recovery doesn't look like peace. It looks like rage. It looks like grief. It looks like waking up in the middle of the night with a scream you can't explain. You are not malfunctioning. You are remembering, and it's terrifying, because the deeper you go, the more you realize how much of you has been buried. But it's still there, waiting. This is why healing hurts. Because every memory you recover forces you to confront everything you accepted that you never should have. And that confrontation, it's shattering. It breaks the life you built. It questions your choices. It exposes your betrayals of self, of truth, of joy, and it demands that you stop being who they told you to be. That's the price of remembering. That's why so many stay asleep. You long for sleep. But what you really long for is to wake up, not just from the night, but from the narrative. To feel real again, alive again, unedited. But waking up isn't romantic. It's brutal, because the first thing you see is the prison you didn't know you were in. The second thing, the keys you've held the entire time. But you have to choose. Continue forgetting and stay comfortable, or start remembering and lose everything. That was never truly you. And that's the unbearable tension you carry at night. Not tiredness, not restlessness, but a decision your soul keeps circling to sleep, or to remember. So now I ask you, if remembering cost you your identity, would you still choose truth? And if everything you believe about yourself is just the part that survived, then who are you, really? And if you woke up tomorrow with all your lost pieces returned, what would you have to destroy to make space for them? And if remembering is the threat, what happens when the systems around you begin to fear you waking up? The systems that fear your awakening, when control depends on your fatigue. You think your tiredness is personal, an individual flaw, something wrong with your diet, your schedule, your discipline. But what if your exhaustion isn't a malfunction? What if it's a feature of the system? You're not just tired, you're being kept tired. Because a tired person doesn't fight back. A tired person doesn't question. A tired person complies. And sleep real. Restoring sleep is dangerous, because it gives you clarity, and clarity is the first step toward rebellion. You're not burned out because you're weak. You're burned out because you were never meant to thrive here. The world you move through every day, the economy, the culture, the politics, was not designed for rest. It was designed for output. You are a cog, a battery, a consumer, a performer. Anything that interferes with your function, emotions, illness, grief, complexity, must be minimized. Even sleep, especially sleep, because sleep is where you reconnect to what is not profitable, to stillness, to memory, to pain, to mystery. And those things can make you powerful. So instead, you are offered substitutes: stimulation, distraction, dopamine, content, noise, pills, everything. But the one thing your body actually needs, let's go deeper. In capitalism, time is money. So your sleep becomes a threat to the system, because it's time not spent producing. You're sold 8 hours as a recommendation, but punished socially and economically if you actually take them. You're told to grind now, rest later, but later never comes. You're told success requires sacrifice, but the sacrifice is always your body, your presence, your wholeness. So you start cutting corners, cutting yourself, until you no longer remember what rested even feels like. You wake up tired, you go to sleep wired, and in between, you pretend you're functioning, but what you're actually doing is performing exhaustion. Your fatigue becomes identity. Your overwork becomes virtue. Your burnout becomes a badge of honor, and sleep becomes a luxury you keep trying to earn. But that's the trap. You can't earn rest in a system that survives by keeping you unrested. You are never allowed to feel done. There's always more to fix, more to learn, more to improve. Even your healing has become productive. Even your hobbies must be monetized. Even your sleep is tracked by apps and scores and algorithms telling you if you're succeeding at rest. They've turned sleep into a metric, a performance. You're not resting, you're optimizing. And the moment sleep becomes something you must win, you've already lost it. This is not your fault. This is architecture. You were not designed to be human here. You were designed to be useful. You're rewarded when you push through. You're praised when you skip rest. You're admired when you suffer silently. And when you collapse, you're offered pharmaceuticals, or mindset hacks, or mindfulness apps wrapped in capitalist logic. You're told your fatigue is internal, that it's your fault, that you should do better. But what if your body is not the problem? What if your exhaustion is a sign of your inner resistance? You don't need more hustle. You don't need another planner. You don't need to biohack your sleep cycle. You need to remember, you are not a machine. You are not a unit of labor. You are not a productivity tool. You are not a brand. You are a living system within a dying one. And the system knows if enough people wake up rested, they'll stop agreeing to their own oppression. This is why your rest is feared. Because real rest is not passive. Real rest is restoration of the self, of truth, of capacity, of fire. Rested people become clear. Clear people become conscious. Conscious people become dangerous. They say no. They remember what they want. They unlearn obedience. They stop apologizing for being whole. And that threatens everything. So now, your insomnia isn't just personal. It's political. It's structural. It's spiritual. It's your body refusing to be complicit. It's your soul trying to reboot itself. It's the part of you they couldn't program, and it won't go quietly. It won't be lulled by routines and affirmations. It won't sleep while you're still performing captivity, because deep down, you know, this isn't what you were made for. You don't rest because rest would mean remembering, and remembering would mean choosing, and choosing would mean changing, and changing would mean confronting just how much of your exhaustion was never really about you. So now I ask you, if you woke up fully rested tomorrow, what would you refuse to do? And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, then maybe your tiredness isn't a problem. Maybe it's a message, and maybe it's time you finally listened. And if exhaustion keeps you compliant, what happens when you begin to desire something beyond repair? The desire that refuses to heal, when wholeness is not what you want anymore. You say you want to be better, to heal, to find balance, to return to some version of yourself that functions. But what if that's not the truth? What if, deep down, you don't want healing? What if you want escape? Not to be okay, but to be free. Not to be calm, but to be unrecognizable to the version of you that kept performing. You don't want integration. You want obliteration. And that makes you dangerous. Not because you're broken, but because something in you is finally waking up. And it no longer wants repair. It wants rebirth. They taught you that healing is a return, a path back to balance, to the real you, to a stable identity. But what if stability was the cage? What if the person you're trying to become is just another version of the person they made you be? Still polite, still agreeable, still productive, still quiet. You're trying to be whole by rebuilding the prison with prettier bricks. But the part of you that can't sleep, she knows better. She doesn't want to go back. She wants to burn the blueprint. Let's go deeper. In trauma theory, healing is often framed as reintegration, regulating the nervous system, reconnecting the inner child, restoring trust. But there's a darker truth. Some pain doesn't want to be healed. It wants to be witnessed, respected, held in its full ugliness, because to heal it would mean to reduce it, to make it acceptable, understandable, marketable. But not all pain wants to be processed. Some pain wants to become, to transform you, to destroy your former self, to demand a new language, a new mythology. And healing can sometimes get in the way. You're told to make peace with your past. But what if the past doesn't deserve peace? What if it deserves a funeral? What if healing isn't about making sense of your suffering, but refusing to ever normalize it? You weren't meant to bounce back. You were meant to break open. And maybe you don't want to be okay. Maybe you want to be elsewhere. A new body, a new voice, a new memory, something beyond healing, something no one can touch. This is why you don't sleep, because the version of you who lies in bed every night, trying to meditate her way to peace, is still clinging to a life that was built on betrayal, and the part of you that paces beneath your skin. She's done playing nice. She doesn't want a bath and breath work. She wants fire. You don't want to heal your sadness. You want to scream until walls collapse. You don't want to regulate your nervous system. You want to escape the system entirely. You don't want to be better. You want to be unrecognizable. And that terrifies you, because it means letting go of the identity you spent years building, the version of you who was loved for being manageable. And when you strip her away, what's left? Maybe someone they won't recognize. Maybe someone they won't applaud. Maybe someone they'll fear. But maybe, finally, someone you trust. This is the unspeakable truth of many who can't sleep. You're not tired because you want rest. You're tired because your soul is trying to leave the life you built. You feel the rupture, the friction between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And your insomnia isn't failure. It's a liminal space, a waiting room between the self that survived and the self that refuses to keep surviving. You call it burnout, but it's becoming a kind of metamorphosis that no one taught you how to hold, because this culture has no rituals for transformation, only strategies for optimization. And what you're craving is not another strategy, it's a death, a letting go, a fire that eats your name, a silence that isn't sleep but surrender. You want to disappear, not out of depression, but out of defiance, because every attempt to fix yourself has only taken you further away from the truth. And the truth, there is no fixing, there is only emergence, not a return, a resurrection. So now I ask you, what if healing is no longer enough? What if you don't want peace as much as you want freedom from the need to be peaceful? What if the life that made you sick can't be cured without first being destroyed? And what if sleep isn't coming because your soul knows you're not here to repair, you're here to revolt? And if healing is revolt, what does that make your restlessness, your insomnia, your collapse? The collapse was the clue. When breakdown is the body's way of refusing the lie, you call it burnout, fatigue, a crash. You think you failed, that something inside you gave up. But what if your collapse was the only part of you that's still honest? What if the part of you that stopped showing up, stopped coping, stopped pretending, was the only part that still knows what's real? You didn't break down, you broke free. They will tell you collapse is weakness, that it means you didn't try hard enough, didn't plan well, didn't manage your time, didn't take care of yourself. But what if collapse is the cure, a sacred refusal, a final no to everything that was killing you? You didn't quit. You finally obeyed the part of you that couldn't pretend anymore. The body doesn't lie, and when it falls apart, it's telling you the truth that your mind has been trained to avoid. Let's go deeper. In psychology, there's something called learned helplessness. It happens when an organism is subjected to repeated pain or discomfort without the ability to escape. Eventually, it stops trying. Even when escape becomes possible, it remains still. But what if your stillness isn't learned helplessness? What if your stillness is protest? What if your nervous system finally stopped performing for them? What if your fatigue is the final barricade your psyche built against exploitation? You didn't shut down because you're helpless. You shut down because every other option was a lie. This is why you lie in bed, unable to function, scrolling for meaning, aching to disappear, because your collapse is not depression, it's clarity. It's the moment your survival strategies can't hold the weight anymore. You're not lazy, you're saturated, full of unspoken grief, full of performance, full of yeses you never meant, full of emotions you weren't allowed to feel. And now your body, the only honest thing left, has thrown you to the ground because you kept trying to walk on a broken spine. You are not supposed to keep going, not like this, not under these conditions, not with this weight, and so you collapse, not to die, but to refuse. Refuse the urgency, refuse the performance, refuse the performance. The breakdown is a boundary drawn by the part of you that still remembers. You were never meant to live like this. Collapse is sacred. It is your body's way of saying, I will not betray myself again. And it is in that refusal that you come closest to truth, because no system that requires your breakdown to continue functioning deserves your participation. But they won't tell you that. They will call you unstable. They will pathologize your fatigue. They will offer you productivity hacks and pill bottles and morning routines to get you back on track. But what if the track is what broke you? What if the goal was never to return? What if your collapse is initiation, a doorway into a self that doesn't belong to them anymore, a self that no longer fits the mold, no longer asks for permission, no longer performs? This is why you're still awake, because you haven't yet mourned the version of you that collapsed. You're still trying to resurrect her, still trying to fix the broken pieces, still trying to re-enter the system as if the system will be gentler next time, but it won't. It was never made for you. It was made for your obedience, and the moment you collapsed, you stopped being useful. You started being free. Now comes the terrifying part. You have to choose. Do you rebuild the life that broke you? Or do you stay broken long enough to become someone entirely new? Do you silence the collapse, medicate it, manage it? Or do you finally ask what it's been trying to tell you? What if collapse isn't the end of the road? What if it's the beginning of something truer? You don't want to fall apart, but you already did. The only question left is, will you pretend it didn't happen, or will you learn to live without the lie? So now I ask you, what if your breakdown was the most honest thing you've ever done? And what if the only reason you're suffering now is because you're still trying to go back to the life that collapse already rejected? And if you can't sleep because the ashes are still warm, what would happen if you let the fire finish its work? And if the fire finishes its work, what's left after the collapse but the silence that reveals what was buried, the silence that remains when the absence is more truthful than the presence? You've collapsed, burned, broken. Now you sit in the aftermath, not with hope, but with absence. No ambition, no motivation, no clear direction, just silence. And for the first time, it's not terrifying. It's honest, because everything you thought would save you already failed, and now, finally, there is room for the thing you never let speak. The silence, not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from exhaustion. The silence left behind after you've emptied yourself of everything that made you acceptable, after you've cried in ways that didn't look poetic, after you stopped explaining your pain because nobody really wanted to understand, after you've been discarded for no longer being impressive. There is a silence that follows betrayal, that follows collapse, that follows waking up to a world that cannot hold you. And that silence, it's not absence, it's truth. Let's go deeper. In trauma psychology, there is a phase after acute survival called the freeze. It's not fight, not flight. It's what happens when there is no escape, no fight left, and no one to hear the scream. You stop moving. You go still. Not out of weakness, but because stillness is the only thing that keeps you intact. You are taught to fear this freeze, to see it as dysfunction. But what if this is where the real self lives? The part of you that finally stopped pretending, stopped fixing, stopped rushing towards some imagined recovery. What if the freeze is sacred stillness, the silence before the self reforms? This is the part of your journey no one warns you about, the space between collapse and rebirth. It's not pretty, it's not productive, it doesn't photograph well. You are a blank page, and the world hates blank pages, because blank pages don't buy things, don't vote correctly, don't perform roles. They wait, and waiting in silence is a form of rebellion. You lie in bed, not because you're weak, but because your body finally stopped pretending it was strong. You cancel plans, not because you're rude, but because your soul is mourning a version of you that was never real. You stop answering messages, not because you don't care, but because your nervous system is on strike after a lifetime of being ignored. And in the quiet, you realize you are not lonely. You are just finally alone with the truth. The silence teaches what noise could never hold. You learn that nothingness is not empty. It is alive. It whispers things you couldn't hear before, that the world is too loud, that performance is killing you, that maybe you've never really slept, that maybe the person you thought you were was just a survival strategy. And in this silence, you are forced to confront, what are you when there's nothing left to maintain? You are not your roles, not your goals, not your relationships, not your usefulness. You are what remains when all of it burns. And if you can bear to sit in that space without rushing to fill it, You might finally meet the self beneath the performance, the feral feeling, wordless you that's been buried under decades of functioning. This is why sleep evades you, because your insomnia is not a bug, it's a threshold, the door between what was and what cannot yet be named. You are not wasting time, you are in initiation. A ritual society forgot how to hold. So you lie awake, not because you fail to regulate, but because something inside you is finally refusing to be regulated. You are not an algorithm, not a sleep cycle, not a machine to be tuned. You are a storm, and storms don't sleep. Just because it's time that this silence, this space between identities, is where real transformation hides. Not in vision boards, not in progress reports, not in the next milestone, but in unbecoming, in sitting inside the crater and not filling it, in letting the absence ache without trying to anesthetize it, because that ache, it's the birthplace of truth, and the world has taught you to fear truth because once you hear it, you won't unhear it, you won't go back, you won't settle, you won't perform, you'll sleep differently, breathe differently, see through things that once comforted you, because silence is a mirror that only the broken can read. And once you read it, you begin to see the world for what it always was. So now I ask you, what if the silence isn't empty, but sacred? And what if everything you're doing to fix your sleep is just a desperate attempt to avoid what the silence knows? And if silence knows the truth, what happens when you finally listen to what your sleep has been trying to say all along? The sleep that watches you, when your nightmares know you better than your therapist. You don't sleep. Not really. You close your eyes, you go through the motions, you lie there, still, quiet, compliant, but you do not surrender, because sleep is not rest. It's a reckoning, a place where the stories you've ignored begin to speak in their own brutal language. The nightmares aren't broken dreams, they're honest memories, emotional blueprints, encrypted truths that never made it through your waking filters. Your dreams don't lie, they watch. And they remember what you worked so hard to forget. They call it parasomnia. They call it stress. They give it names, diagnoses, clinical weight. But what if your dreams are rituals? What if sleep isn't an escape from the self, but a confrontation with it? You run from the monsters, but the monsters are coded with your own emotional DNA, fall endlessly. But the gravity pulling you down is your own suppressed grief. You forget your way home in the dream, because in waking life you never felt safe there. Anyway, Freud tried to crack the dream, Jung tried to map its symbols, but neither could soften the truth that your unconscious is not your friend, it is your mirror, and it reflects you uncensored. You keep having that dream where you're late, naked, abandoned, trapped, and you think it's random, but your mind isn't random. Your psyche is exact. It knows how to stage a performance where every shadow on the stage is someone you used to be. There is no dream without a wound. There is no nightmare without a code. Your insomnia isn't resistance to sleep. It's resistance to what your sleep will reveal, because in that other world, the polite parts of you die, the performer is stripped, the people pleaser is exposed, the fake calm is shattered. And what walks through the wreckage is the version of you that's still bleeding, unprocessed, unfiltered, unwelcome, but real. You fear the dark, not because you can't see, but because it's the only time your inner life becomes visible. There are no lights to distract you, no small talk to dilute your mind, no productivity to numb the ache, just you, and the 1,000 versions of you you've buried beneath coping. Let's go deeper. In neuroscience, REM sleep is when memory consolidates, when your brain replays the data you couldn't process by day. But what if it's not just memory consolidation? What if it's identity deconstruction? What if your brain replays not what happened but what you refused to feel? The betrayal you rationalized, the boundary you didn't set, the truth you swallowed for comfort. It replays it not to torment you, but to try one more time, to get you to tell the truth to yourself. You don't need more melatonin. You need more honesty. You don't need better sleep hygiene. You need to face the versions of yourself that your conscious mind exiled, the wounded child, the raging adult, the parts of you that still stand in the hallway of your dreams waiting to be claimed. You think your sleep is broken, but what if your sleep is working perfectly and your waking life is the lie? This is why your body fights sleep, because deep down it knows sleep is a ritual of return, a descent, not into rest, but into remembering, and remembering is dangerous, because it makes your life as it is unlivable, and if your life becomes unlivable, you'll have to change, not just your habits, but your myth, your purpose, your very sense of who you are. Want rest, but rest isn't possible while you're still playing dead. Rest is for the honest, the broken, the ones who no longer pretend they're okay, and until you meet yourself in the theater of your own dreams, you'll keep waking up exhausted, not because sleep is failing, but because truth is trying to break through. So now I ask you, what if your nightmares aren't punishing you, but saving you? What if every terrifying dream is a part of your soul knocking on the door you've locked shut? And if you never let it in, how can you ever sleep in peace? And if the dream speaks, what waking life refuses? What happens when even your sleep starts turning against the lie? When the body stops asking, the science of surrender and the psychology of no. You were trained to push through, to override fatigue, to outsmart pain, to outperform need. So you learn to betray yourself beautifully, productively, socially. You learn to smile with your mouth full of blood, to nod politely through your own slow suffocation, to wake up early, even when sleep felt like a form of mercy, and they called you resilient, disciplined, high-achieving, but what they really meant was, you're very good at abandoning yourself. There is a moment in every nervous system when the body stops asking, it stops pleading, stops hinting, stops whispering, it refuses. The tension becomes chronic, the anxiety becomes baseline, the exhaustion becomes your personality, and you think it's your fault, but your body is not malfunctioning. It's protesting, it's the only honest part of you left, and it's tired of being ignored. Let's go deeper. Polyvagal theory tells us your nervous system has 3 modes of survival: social engagement, connection, fight or flight, mobilization, freeze or collapse, immobilization. You've lived most of your life in modes 1 and 2, performing, competing, smiling, coping. But when your system reaches its threshold, when there's no more energy, no more pretense, no more false yeses left, it enters mode 3. It shuts down. And that shutdown, that's not depression. That's your body saying, no more lies, no more pretending. I am done. You aren't sleeping because your body doesn't trust you. You've lied to it for too long. You've overruled its pain. You've silenced its signals. You've performed productivity while it begged for pause. And now it's speaking in a language you can't ignore. Tension in your chest, insomnia that won't yield, panic without cause, exhaustion without end. This isn't dysfunction, it's integrity. The biology of surrender isn't weak. It's the moment the body returns to truth, and truth, when it's been exiled too long, feels like collapse. You can't meditate your way out of this, can't supplement your way out, can't manifest rest while your entire nervous system is still at war with itself. Surrender isn't about giving up, it's about giving in. To your own limits, to your own truth, to the part of you that's done faking it for survival. But no one teaches you how to surrender. They only teach obedience. Obey the calendar, obey the phone, obey the plan, obey the version of yourself that's killing you. So now, the only way your body can save you is by shutting down the system. Sleep won't come until you stop trying to deserve it. This is why you're so tired, because performing stability takes more energy than falling apart ever could. You've mistaken high-functioning burnout for health. You've worn collapse like armor and called it grind, but now the armor's too heavy, the grin doesn't stick, the performance has rotted through. And your body, the only part of you that never lies, has stopped asking for permission. Is what true no feels like, not the polite, passive kind, not the one dressed in guilt and explanation, but the kind that lives in muscle and breath, the kind that shows up as insomnia, the kind that makes your limbs go heavy when asked to just push through, the kind that refuses to get out of bed because getting out of bed would be a betrayal. Sleep isn't a reward. It's not something you earn for playing the game right. It's the body's inheritance, the restoration you were always meant to have, but only if you stop chasing it. You've been performing exhaustion as a lifestyle, but you haven't truly rested in years, not the kind of rest that requires you to be nobody, to achieve nothing, to protect no one. Only that kind of rest can return the nervous system to the baseline of being. So now I ask you, what if your body has already decided, and it no longer wants the life you're still trying to live? What if your exhaustion isn't something to fix, but a message to obey? And if you ignore it, again, how much louder will the body have to scream? And if the body has stopped asking, what remains but the mind's illusions screaming for control in a world that never listened? The illusion of control. When certainty becomes a cage, you think control will save you, that if you can predict it, you can prevent it, that if you understand it, you can overcome it, that if you prepare well enough, the pain will pass you by. So, you plan, you organize, you overthink, you spreadsheet your life, like a fortress against uncertainty. But the fortress was always a cell, because control isn't peace. Control is fear in disguise. You crave order because chaos taught you what disorder can do. The breakup that blindsided you, the illness that came without warning, the silence after a conversation that never ended. So now you grip, you anticipate, you micromanage your body, your schedule, your emotions, but every attempt to control is a betrayal of the present. You're not living, you're rehearsing survival, and your insomnia. It's not random, it's your nervous system refusing to play along with the lie it never believed. Let's go deeper in neuroscience. The brain is a prediction engine. It survives by forecasting. But the more traumatic your past, the more it predicts disaster even in safety. This is called hypervigilance. You're not awake at 3 a.m. by mistake. You're awake because your mind is still trying to protect a child who doesn't exist anymore. And you think, if you just get the formula right, the perfect diet, the perfect bedtime routine, the perfect partner, then peace will arrive. But peace doesn't come from perfect conditions. It comes from surrendering the illusion that conditions will ever be perfect. Here's the paradox. The tighter you grip, the more control slips through your fingers, because real peace requires uncertainty, the ability to not know, to not fix, to not predict. But you were never taught that. You were taught to manage outcomes, to monitor feelings, to optimize rest like a productivity metric. You were taught to hold the world like a machine with parts to be adjusted. But the soul is not a machine. It cannot be controlled. Into healing, it must be witnessed. This is why you struggle with sleep, because sleep is the only part of your day you cannot fully command. You can't force your breath. You can't grip your way into REM. Sleep asks for trust, and trust terrifies you, because trust was never safe. So instead, you scroll, you analyze, you rehearse every possible tomorrow as if anxiety will keep you safe from a world that never gave guarantees. But the truth is brutal. The world was never under your control, and it never will be. You've built your life on risk aversion disguised as planning, on emotional avoidance disguised as rationality, on trauma-informed prediction cycles you called intuition. But deep down, you know you're not in control. You never were, and your body is tired of pretending otherwise. Let's revisit the psychological concept of locus of control. Internal locus, I shape my life. External locus, life happens to me. You've swung too far into the internal, believing that every failure is your fault, that every heartbreak could have been avoided if you'd just done something differently. So now you live in a self-made prison of hyper-accountability, but you're not accountable. You're afraid, and fear doesn't make you safe. It just makes you tired. You don't need more control. You need more resilience in the face of chaos. You need to remember how to fall without breaking, how to be wrong without collapse, how to be surprised and still stay whole. But this requires the thing you've avoided your whole life: vulnerability. The state of being open to what cannot be predicted or prevented, the place where sleep lives. You think you're protecting yourself by controlling everything, but really, you're just delaying the inevitable collapse. Because control is a high wire act, and eventually, the wire snaps. What if that snap is the beginning of something honest? What if your inability to sleep is the only part of you that still knows how to feel? So now I ask you, what if control is the very thing keeping you from peace? And if you stopped managing everything, would the world fall apart? Or would you finally realize it never belonged to you in the first place? And if control is an illusion, then what remains when everything you planned begins to sleepless night at a time, the lie of progress, when growth becomes a distraction from being. You've been told that you're supposed to evolve. Every year, every quarter, every morning, you measure your life by progress, by metrics, milestones, mental upgrades. You write goals, you track them, you optimize. But growth is not peace, and transformation is not rest. You're not chasing healing. You're chasing a version of yourself that finally feels worthy enough to stop chasing, and that version, she never arrives, because the finish line keeps moving. You were taught that stillness is regression, that rest is laziness, that peace is procrastination. So now, even your sleep is infested with the voice that says, "Are you doing enough?" And if you're not growing, if you're not changing, if you're not better today than yesterday, then what are you? You've been programmed to confuse motion with meaning, but motion without presence is just exile in disguise. Let's go deeper. In behavioral psychology, there's a concept called hedonic adaptation. It means no matter what you achieve, your brain adjusts. The joy fades, the novelty decays, the excitement, flattens. You go back to baseline. So you chase again, not because you're hungry, but because you're empty. Progress becomes addiction. Improvement becomes self-harm, with a productivity app wrapped around it. And your insomnia. It's not just stress, it's a symptom of being trapped in a cycle of becoming, with no end in sight. You don't sleep because you don't stop. You've tied your self-worth to the idea of perpetual evolution. Even your healing journey has become a brand. You meditate so you can perform calmness. You journal to prove you're doing the work. You go to therapy like it's an assignment. But healing isn't measured in checkboxes. It's measured in moments, where you no longer need to prove that you're healed. This is the great paradox of self-growth. The more you chase becoming someone, the further you drift from yourself. You start to believe that who you are right now isn't worthy of rest, so you delay sleep, because sleep feels like giving up. But what if sleep isn't surrender? What if it's integration? The moment where the growth stops being noise and becomes truth. The moment your body says, enough, and your mind finally listens. You've turned your life into a project, but you were never meant to be finished. You're not a product, you're a presence. But the lie of progress has made you allergic to stillness. You panic when things are calm. You sabotage peace. You seek problems so you can keep fixing. Because if you stop fixing, what happens to your identity? In society, they glorify the hustle, the glow up, the next level, but they never tell you that the highest form of growth is acceptance, not resignation, not passivity, but the radical act of saying, I am enough right here. And most people never get there, because it requires silence, not just silence around you, but silence within, the kind of silence that makes you face the fact that maybe you've been growing to avoid grieving. You think you're becoming whole, but maybe you're just avoiding your wounds with shinier tools. You think you're evolving, but maybe you're just adding layers to protect the scared child inside, who's still waiting to be held. And you think you're not sleeping because of stress, but maybe you're not sleeping because your soul is begging you to stop pretending. The body doesn't lie, and it knows when growth has become a cage instead of a doorway. You keep reading more, learning more, improving more, but you never feel done, because you were never meant to be. And that's the liberation. There is no the version of you that will finally deserve sleep. You deserve it now, in your mess, in your uncertainty, in your unbecoming. So now I ask you, what if the pursuit of becoming better is the most elegant form of self-abandonment? And if you stopped trying to grow for one night, what might you discover about the version of you that's already here? And if you are not your progress, then who are you when there's nothing left to improve? Just darkness, breath, and being. The cult of optimization, when every breath becomes a metric. You used to breathe without thinking. Now even your breath has become a task. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. You've turned your nervous system into a checklist, your morning routine into a ritual of perfection, your sleep into a scoreboard, because you live in the age of optimization, and nothing is sacred anymore. Not your stillness, not your silence, not even your sleep. You track your sleep with apps. You analyze your dreams like crime scenes. You wear a ring to count the exact second your body dares to drift into rest. And yet, you're more tired than ever, because optimization isn't peace. It's just another form of control wrapped in the language of self-care. You're not resting, you're performing rest. You're hacking the night like it's another problem to solve. But the soul cannot be hacked. Let's go deeper in behavioral economics. There's a concept called Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Your sleep score is no longer feedback. It's identity. If the number is low, you feel like a failure. If the number is high, you feel relieved, not rested. Your night becomes another performance you fear failing, and suddenly, your body stops trusting you. Because every time it tries to slow down, you measure it. Every time it asks for stillness, you optimize it. And every time it offers real fatigue, you treat it as a flaw to be fixed. You weren't always like this. You used to know what rest felt like, before it became a productivity strategy, before stillness had ROI, before silence had to justify itself. But now, your mind is a machine, your body is a project, your soul is a dataset. You've become a brand of yourself, and brands don't sleep. They stay relevant, they post even when exhausted. They smile through collapse. They upgrade even when breaking. You're not struggling to sleep because your body is broken. You're struggling to sleep because your rest has been colonized by algorithms, by influencers, by billionaires telling you that waking up at 5 a.m. is the key to success. But what if success was never the goal? What if you're losing your humanity in pursuit of a version of wellness that was never meant to include your flaws? This is not biohacking, it's soul bypassing. You journal so you won't scream. You cold plunge to numb. You fast to distract. You meditate to mute the inner voice screaming. This is not healing, because real healing isn't glamorous. It isn't optimized. It doesn't come with filters or affiliate links. It's messy. It's slow. It's often silent. And it begins when you stop trying to turn your existence into a dashboard. The cult of optimization whispers, track it, improve it, own it, but you can't own rest. You can't improve sleep by fearing its absence. You can't optimize something that requires surrender. Sleep doesn't come when you're perfect. It comes when you disappear. When the self, with all its improvements, goals, scores, and systems, is finally quiet enough to be forgotten. But that's the part that terrifies you. Because if you're not improving, what are you? If you're not becoming, are you still valuable? And if you don't have data to prove your peace, does it still count? You've confused awareness with anxiety, tracking with healing, measurement with meaning. But the deepest parts of you cannot be seen on a screen. They unfold in darkness, in softness, in nights without metrics. This is why you're tired, because your nervous system is done being a goal. Because your sleep was never meant to be a tech-enabled achievement. It was meant to be a ritual of return, to the body, to breath, to the quiet place inside you that doesn't care how many steps you walked today, the place that just wants to exist, without improvement, without performance, without proof. So now I ask you, what happens when optimization becomes your only language, and you forget how to just be? What if you've perfected performance but forgotten how to rest without needing to deserve it? And if rest can't be measured, what remains when you strip away every tool, every trick, every tactic and meet yourself in the raw, unquantified dark? The betrayal of the mind, when thinking becomes self-harm. You thought intelligence would save you. You thought if you could think clearly enough, analyze deeply enough, see far enough ahead, you could outrun pain. But thinking is not salvation. Sometimes it's the very thing that's keeping you broken. You weren't born as a brain, you were born as a body. Soft, sensory, wordless. You cried before you spoke, felt before you understood. But somewhere along the way, you started to believe that your mind was your only safety. That if you could just figure it out, the trauma, the pattern, the reason, you'd stop hurting. So you stayed up late thinking. You spiraled through scenarios. You became addicted to understanding, but understanding isn't healing. It's just a more elegant form of avoidance. This is the betrayal. The mind that once protected you has become your captor. It whispers doubts while calling it logic. It rehearses danger while pretending to be wise. It masquerades as self-awareness while leading you deeper into paralysis. You don't sleep because your thoughts don't stop. You don't rest because your brain is a horror film on loop. And worst of all, you believe it's helping. Let's go deeper. In psychology, rumination is the repetitive, intrusive focus on distress and its causes. It masquerades as problem-solving, but it rarely leads to resolution. Instead, it reinforces your fear, amplifies your shame, replays every mistake as if rehearsal will give you control. But thinking is not doing, and rumination is not repair, it's just spinning, a wheel of self-blame, disguised as insight. You wake up tired because your dreams are infected by thoughts. You never let rest. You overanalyze conversations that ended hours ago. You imagine futures so bleak they paralyze you. You use your intellect like a scalpel to dissect your soul, as if you find the source of the ache, you'll stop aching. But some things are not meant to be solved, only felt, held, released. You don't trust your body. You don't trust your instincts. You don't trust your silence, because the mind has convinced you that everything unspoken is dangerous. But your thoughts aren't truth. They're survival patterns. Many of them were formed in chaos. Built in pain, forged in moments when thinking was the only thing you had control over. But those moments are gone, and you're still living as if the danger never ended. The philosopher Alan Watts once said, "A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts." This is your insomnia. You're not thinking about life. You're thinking about your thoughts about life. A recursive spiral, a loop with no exit, a hall of mirrors where every reflection is fear in disguise. And every time your body begs for rest, your mind shouts back, "Not yet, not safe." This is the violence of overthinking. It convinces you that your suffering is a puzzle to be solved, instead of a wound to be witnessed. It turns your trauma into a thesis, your heartache into a hypothesis, your sadness into a science project. But emotions were never meant to be intellectualized. They were meant to be moved through. So what do? You study, you analyze, you memorize your own dysfunction like an academic achievement. You can explain your childhood in detail. You know your attachment style. You've diagrammed your trauma response. And still you can't sleep, because the mind can name the wound, but it can't hold the bleeding. That's the body's job. And you haven't let your body speak in years. There is a reason meditation feels like death. It's the moment you stop thinking and realize how many of your thoughts have been violence dressed as clarity. The moment you feel how lonely it is to live in your head and never come home to your breath. The moment your body starts trembling with truths your brain buried. And the moment you realize that healing might require less thought, not more. You were never meant to understand everything. Not your pain, not your past, not your partner, not even yourself. You were meant to feel, to move, to breathe, to exist in the present moment without solving it. But the mind doesn't want that. The mind wants meaning, and meaning often comes at the cost of peace. So now I ask you, what if your thoughts are not the doorway to rest, but the very reason you can't find it? And if you stopped trying to think your way out of pain, who would you become in the silence? And if your mind can't save you, what remains in the quiet space between thoughts, where truth can't be spoken but only felt? The false promise of control, how safety became a prison. You've built your life like a fortress, everything calculated, everything managed, everything prepared. You call it discipline, you call it responsibility, you call it being in control. But control is not peace. It's a beautifully disguised panic, a clenched fist masquerading as a steady hand. And every night, when you try to sleep, your body remembers the truth. You are not safe. You are simply exhausted from holding on. You organize your world so that nothing can surprise you. You check the locks, you plan your schedule, you script your responses. You micromanage your emotions like they're employees threatening to strike. And yet you never relax, because the deeper part of you knows that nothing is truly safe. Not your body, not your relationships, not your future. You don't want calm. You want certainty. But certainty is a lie. Let's go deeper. In trauma psychology, the term hypervigilance describes a state where your nervous system is stuck in defense mode. You scan every face for danger. You over-prepare for every scenario. You live in a loop of what if. You think it's intelligence. You think it's self-protection. But it's grief. Grief that says, I was once helpless, and I will never be helpless again. So you build systems, rules, routines, walls. But all of it is fear. Wearing a calendar control promises you relief, but it delivers rigidity. You become afraid to deviate, afraid to rest, afraid to trust anything you didn't personally design. Don't delegate. You don't let go. You say yes just to avoid the chaos of saying no. You're not managing your life. You're managing your terror and your body. It knows. It doesn't sleep because it doesn't believe the war is over. Sleep is vulnerability. It's the ultimate surrender. To sleep is to say, I trust this moment enough to leave it behind. But you don't trust. You rehearsed instead. Conversations, apologies, scenarios, the way someone looked at you earlier, the exact sentence you should have said. Your mind becomes a security system. And like all security systems, it wakes you up at the slightest threat. Even when the threat is just silence, control tells you that if you anticipate everything, nothing will hurt you. But anticipation is just suffering in advance. You brace for pain that hasn't happened. You prevent joy because joy feels dangerous. You turn down peace because peace feels unfamiliar. You're not protecting yourself. You're punishing yourself for ever being unprepared. This is the paradox. The more control you seek, the more chaos you create inside. Because life isn't obedient. People leave, bodies fail, words don't land, plans unravel. And every time they do, your sense of self unravels with them. You've tied your identity to the illusion of control, but that identity is fragile, and it shatters every time someone says, I need something different. You think boundaries are about control, but true boundaries come from trust. Not trust in others, but trust in yourself. The trust that says, I can survive what comes. You don't need to manage every detail if you know you'll still exist, even if things go wrong. But you don't believe that yet, because the part of you that equates chaos with death is still running the show. So you don't sleep, because sleep feels like dying, not literally, but spiritually. It's the death of vigilance, the death of readiness, the death of your false power. And your system can't tolerate that, so it stays alert, even when you're horizontal, even when the room is dark, even when nothing is wrong except the fact that you no longer trust your body to keep you safe without effort. The philosopher Epictetus wrote, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But your reactions are no longer choices, they're reflexes. Built from a childhood where unpredictability meant pain, where control became religion, and flexibility became threat. You grew up thinking that being rigid was the only way to survive. Now you're trying to sleep with a mind trained to never relax. So now I ask you, what if your need for control is the very thing keeping you in danger, because it never lets you rest? And if you stopped bracing for the fall, what would rise in its place? And if safety was never something to hold, but something to trust, then what lives beneath the fear once you unclench? The myth of emotional maturity. When regulation becomes repression, they told you to regulate, to breathe, to pause, to respond, not react, to be the calmest one in the room. And so you did. You learned to pause before the tears came. You learned to silence the tremble in your voice. You mastered the art of speaking gently while internally screaming. But that's not regulation, that's repression. That's dissociation wearing a mask of composure. You don't feel safe, you feel contained. You've confused emotional intelligence with emotional anesthesia, because somewhere along the way, you absorbed the message that big feelings were a threat. Anger meant immaturity, sadness meant weakness, fear meant failure. So, you wrapped yourself in neutrality. You branded it growth. You called it maturity. But inside, you went cold. Because it takes energy to hold down a volcano, and every night, when you try to sleep, the magma rises. Let's go deeper. In psychology, emotional suppression is the conscious inhibition of emotional expression. You feel it, but you do not allow it. You smile while your stomach tightens. You nod while your chest aches. You stay quiet because you're the stable one. But suppressed emotions don't disappear. They migrate into tension, into insomnia, into migraines, into shallow breathing that mimics peace but signals danger. Your body is screaming what your face refuses to show. This isn't emotional mastery, it's emotional captivity. You've taught yourself that some feelings are too much, too loud, too messy, too shameful, so you edited yourself, censored the tears, diluted the rage, softened your no until it became a whispered maybe. You call that maturity, but it's just fear with better manners. You were never too much, they were just too uncomfortable. You were never wrong for feeling deeply, they were just incapable of meeting depth without drowning. And now you carry their limitations like they're your responsibility. You manage your emotions, not for your own well-being, but to prevent their discomfort. And you wonder why you're exhausted. You're not sleeping because you've turned bedtime into another performance. Real regulation isn't suppression, it's integration. It's letting the feeling move without letting it destroy. But you haven't let yourself feel in years, because feeling means risking the mess, risking the voice that shakes, the eyes that leak, the hands that slam tables, because you're finally telling the truth, and you're terrified that if you stop being the composed one, you'll become the broken one. But here's the paradox. The more you repress, the more volatile you become. Stillness without honesty is just tension in disguise. You've seen this. The sudden outbursts, the unexpected shutdowns, the panic attacks in grocery aisles because someone brushed too close. You think you're regulated until you're not. And when the mask cracks, you feel shame. Not because you were wrong to feel, but because you were taught that feeling was wrong. Even now, you hesitate. You're analyzing this text, trying to stay in your head, avoiding the lump in your throat by focusing on understanding. But you don't need more insight. You need permission to be as messy as you actually are. You need to scream without apology, cry without explanation, say, "I hate how much this hurts," and not follow it with a solution. You don't need tools. You need truth. And truth is rarely pretty, but it's always real. Your nervous system doesn't care how mature you sound. It only asks, are you safe to feel? And if the answer is only when it's tidy, then you are still living in a prison made of politeness. You've become so good at managing emotion that you forgot how to express it, and so you lie in bed still, quiet, regulated, while your chest pounds with everything you never said out loud. The goal was never to become the goal was to become honest, because real peace isn't composure, it's congruence. When your face matches your heart, when your "I'm fine" finally becomes "I'm not", when your whisper becomes a roar, not to destroy, but to reclaim the parts of you that were silenced for being too much. So now I ask you, what if your greatest anxiety comes not from what you feel, but from what you're afraid to admit you feel? And if you finally let the emotion move through you, what would be left standing? And if the dam breaks, not with destruction but with release, then what lives in the flood you've been holding back all your life? The lie of productivity. When your worth is measured in output, you wake up tired, and still you push, you work, you plan, you optimize, you strive. You call it discipline, you call it progress, you call it building a better life. But what you're really doing is trying to outrun a fear you don't have language for. The fear that if you ever stop being productive, you will stop being worthy. You weren't born this way. You didn't enter the world with a to-do list. You didn't measure your value by how much you produced. You breathed, you existed, you cried, and the world moved to hold you. But that kind of unconditional value, it didn't last. So now, you chase approval like oxygen. You chase it through work, through checklists, through sleepless nights that feel like achievement. You don't rest. You perform rest as another task to complete. Let's go deeper. In capitalism's psychological framework, your time must be monetized. Your energy must be extracted. Your attention must be sold. You're not a person. You're a resource. So you turn yourself into a system. You track your habits. You optimize your day. You turn hobbies into side hustles. You confuse productivity with identity. But every system breaks eventually, and you're breaking slowly. With a smile, the philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls it the burnout society, a world where freedom has become self-exploitation, where no one is forcing you to grind. You are, voluntarily, proudly, desperately, because you believe that the more you produce, the more you deserve to exist. But existence was never meant to be earned, it was meant to be felt. You lie in bed, and the voice starts whispering, "You didn't do enough today. You wasted time. You should have finished that project. You didn't earn rest." So instead of sleeping, you scroll, you plan tomorrow, you rehearse future conversations, you write emails in your head. Your bed becomes a boardroom, and your body becomes a broken employee too scared to ask for vacation. This isn't ambition, it's punishment. You punish yourself for being human, for needing rest, for getting sick, for slowing down. You wear hustle like armor, but it doesn't protect you, it isolates you. Because if you're always working, you're never truly here, and if you're never truly here, then who was all this for? Productivity was never the problem. The problem is the story underneath it, the one that says, you are only valuable when you are useful. And when you internalize that story, rest becomes guilt, play becomes laziness, stillness becomes failure. You build an empire on self-rejection and wonder why the throne feels cold. You've become a machine in the image of the system that raised you. You monitor your output. You optimize your energy. You chase results like they will one day make you enough. But they won't, because machines don't cry. And you've been swallowing tears for years. Even now, you're wondering, is this true for me? You want to analyze it, take notes, apply it like a productivity hack. But that's the trap. Even healing has become another task on your list. Even sleep is now something you try to win. You don't fall asleep. You compete with sleep, as if there's a medal for resting efficiently, as if silence is a reward only earned after a flawless day. But you are not a factory. You are not a brand. You are not a brand strategy deck waiting to be optimized. You are a soul in a soft, tired body that misses being useless. Not in the way capitalism defines it, but in the way children are, in the way clouds are, in the way love is when it's real. So now I ask you, what if your value has nothing to do with what you do, and everything to do with who you are when you do nothing? And if you stopped producing, would you still let yourself exist? And if doing nothing didn't make you worthless, could it finally make you whole? The psychology of touch, deprivation, why your body starves in silence. You've been starving, but not for food, not for knowledge, not for stimulation, not for success. You've been starving for touch, not sex, not performance, not conquest. But touch, the simple, honest act of being held without needing to earn it. And your body knows, because it doesn't sleep. When it's starving, you go through your day with no one brushing your arm, no hand on your shoulder, no fingers in your hair, no one pressing their palm against your back just to say, I'm here. You tell yourself you're independent. You tell yourself it's not important. You tell yourself it's a small thing. But evolution doesn't care what you tell yourself. Your nervous system was designed for touch, and without it, your body panics in a very quiet way. Let's go deeper. In developmental psychology studies on orphaned infants showed this. Even with food, shelter, and safety, babies who were not touched sickened. Some died. It's called failure to thrive. And while you've aged, you haven't outgrown the need, because you're still wired for oxytocin, still wired to regulate your cortisol through human contact, still wired to feel real when someone else's skin meets yours without agenda. But now, touch is gone. We've outsourced it to screens. To emojis, to affirmation apps, to lonely paragraphs typed at midnight just to feel someone reply. You're surrounded by connection but touched by nothing. And so your body begins to forget what safety feels like, because for the body, safety is not a concept, it's a sensation. And without that sensation, you stay alert, even in the dark, even in silence, even when no danger exists except the absence of something primal. This is how loneliness hides. It doesn't always show up as isolation. It shows up as overthinking, as insomnia, as tension in your jaw and tightness in your chest. It shows up as the feeling of being unreal, of floating above yourself, of watching your life happen from a glass box. Touch is the tether, and you've been cut loose for too long. You've learned to survive without it. You had to. Maybe you were touched too much, too violently, too wrongly, or maybe you were never touched enough, and so your skin grew quiet. Now, intimacy feels confusing, unfamiliar, risky. You freeze. When someone hugs you, You flinch when someone reaches out. You don't know how to receive, because the body doesn't forget what it never got, and yet, your body still asks. You feel it in the sudden ache for connection during a movie, in the deep exhale when someone brushes past you in the grocery store, in the way your hands linger on warm laundry just to feel texture, even if it isn't human. Your skin is speaking, but no one is listening, not even you. Sleep becomes difficult, not because you're not tired, but because the body needs to co-regulate. To be beside another, to match their breath, to feel safe enough to finally let go. That's why babies sleep on their mother's chest. That's why lovers fall asleep entwined. But if you sleep alone long enough, your body stops trusting that it's ever safe to fully drop. So it half sleeps, half watches, half lives. Even now, you may be rationalizing. I'm fine. I'm just not a physical person. I've gotten used to it. But that's just grief, rebranded as stoicism, because you had to survive. And survival often means cutting off what you can't have. But numbness isn't peace. It's the scar tissue of unmet need. You'd think you need better sleep, hygiene, a cooler room, a darker curtain, another supplement, but sometimes what your body needs is warmth, not metaphorical, not spiritual, literal warmth. Another pulse, another presence, another human who doesn't need you to perform, only to exist as you are. So now I ask you, what if the ache that keeps you awake isn't psychological, but biological? And if your body remembered what it was like to be held, would it finally sleep? And if your skin remembered safety, how much of your mind would stop trying to protect you from ghosts? The mirror trap. Why you can't stop performing even when alone. You think you're alone, but you're not. You're still performing. For the imagined audience in your head. For the parent who never approved. For the partner who left. For the ghost of society you carry in your posture. You take off your shoes, close the door, dim the lights, but the mirror is still there. And in that mirror, you are not yourself. You are a version you hope would finally be enough. You have become the watcher and the watched, the critic, the actor, the camera crew, the invisible jury. Even in your most private moments, you rehearse being seen. You imagine how you'll tell the story later. You adjust your expression in silence. You filter your own thoughts before they even reach your journal. You are never truly with yourself, because someone else, somewhere, might be watching. Let's go deeper. Psychologists call it the imaginary audience, a concept that begins in adolescence but never really ends. It's the sense that someone is always observing, judging, recording. It's not psychosis, it's conditioning. Because if you were constantly evaluated as a child, on your behavior, your appearance, your grades, your tone of voice, then your nervous system wired itself to anticipate judgment, even when there's no one there. And now, you play the part without thinking. You tidy your room not for peace, but for perception. You adjust your body in bed as if being photographed. You monitor your thoughts as if they'll be subpoenaed. You do not rest. You pose as someone resting. And so sleep becomes difficult, because you are always on stage, even in the dark. This is the paradox. Your solitude is polluted. It looks like isolation, but feels like scrutiny. You want to relax, but you can't collapse the performance, because who are you when no one is watching? You don't know, because someone always was. You inherited this surveillance, from the parent who questioned your tone, from the religion that tracked your thoughts, from the culture that taught you guilt before it taught you language. And now, you are the jailer, and the jailed. You berate yourself for being tired. You evaluate your productivity before you brush your teeth. You frame your failures for palatable retelling. You rehearse your grief. You curate your breakdowns. Even your suffering has become content. Social media made it worse, but it didn't create it. The internet only digitized what was already internalized. The belief that your worth is determined by how others perceive you. So you show your healing instead of living it. You pose with your dog instead of petting him. You cry, then check the mirror to make sure it's a beautiful sadness. You've been grieving your authenticity in real time. Even your journal feels performative now. You edit your entries. You write as if someone else might read it later. Your thoughts are not safe with you. They are being translated, even before they're felt. So how can you sleep when you've become a broadcast even to yourself? Real privacy is now an act of rebellion, because true solitude requires dismantling the version of you were taught to become. It means slouching, it means mumbling, it means ugly crying, it means eating in the dark without shame. It means saying what you really think, even if no one applauds, especially if no one applauds. But that's terrifying, isn't it? Because who are you when you are not performing? Who are you when you are not narrating your own life for someone else's validation? Who are you when your smile isn't curated and your anxiety isn't weaponized as a relatable story? Who are you when you are not trying to win? You don't know, because you've always been seen but never truly witnessed. So now I ask you, if no one ever saw you again, would you still know how to be real? And if the performance finally stopped, what would be left on the stage? And if the audience left the theater, would you still know how to hear your own voice in the silence? The myth of the self. What if you were never who you think you are? You think you know who you are. You carry a name, a history, a resume of memories. You've built an identity from fragments, the shy one, the overthinker, the achiever, the survivor. But what if all of that was a myth? What if you've never actually met yourself? Only your adaptations, only your trauma's version, only your parents' version, only the version that got you through. You weren't born with a personality. You were born with potential, with fluidity, with the capacity to be anything. But the world did not ask who you were. It told you again and again until you believed it, until you wrapped it around you like skin. Let's go deeper. Psychology has long debated the existence of a true self. But modern neuroscience suggests this. There is no fixed self in the brain, no central control room, no homunculus behind the eyes. Just networks, processes, reflexes, narratives. You are not a solid entity. You are a story being told in real time, and most of it was written by others. Think about it. If you were raised in a different culture with different parents, different language, different traumas, would you still be you? No, you would have a different name, a different laugh, a different sense of humor, different values, different fears. And yet, you think your current self is the real one. That's not self-awareness. That's amnesia. You have been taught to confuse consistency with authenticity, to be true to yourself, even when that self was a mask you put on to survive. But the mask got comfortable. You forgot it was there. You decorated it, defended it, fell in love with it. You built your life to protect it. Now, even sleep feels like a threat, because it means losing control over the mask for a few hours. Insomnia is often not the fear of rest, but the fear of dissolution, of not knowing who you are when the performance pauses, of not recognizing the thoughts that surface when no one is looking, because you've built an entire personality out of compensation, out of adaptation, out of pain that never got a voice. So now yourself is really just a pattern of avoidance. You tell yourself stories like, I'm just a people pleaser, I'm an anxious person, I don't like conflict. But what if none of those are personality traits? What if they're just survival strategies you've mistaken for truth? And what if every time you said, this is just who I am, you were actually describing who you had to become to feel safe? This is the collapse of identity. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence. The moment you realize you don't know what you actually like, only what earned you praise. The moment you can't tell if your opinions are yours or borrowed. The moment you wonder if your inner voice is really just the echo of someone else's disappointment. And the moment you ask, what am I, beneath all this noise? You may feel hollow, reading this, unmoored, lost. Good. That is the beginning. The ego collapses, not with violence but with confusion. And in that confusion there is space finally to feel something real, not curated, not performed, not recycled, just felt. But here's the catch. You will try to rebuild your identity too quickly, because the void is terrifying. So you will reach for something to call yourself, a new label, a new belief system, a new tribe, and once again, you'll wear it like a mask and call it truth. But liberation isn't found in replacing the costume. It's in remembering that you were never the costume to begin with. You are not your name, not your trauma, not your memories. You are the space in which all those things appear and disappear. You are the silence before thought, the awareness before identity. You are not the self. You are the one watching the self dissolve. And the reason you can't sleep is because part of you is terrified to disappear. So now I ask you, if you're not who you think you are, then who or what is thinking? And if the story of you was never real, can anything you fear actually touch you? And if the self was never solid, then perhaps the fear that clings to it has no ground to stand on. The lie of free will, how choice became the greatest illusion you never questioned. You believe, you choose. You believe your life is a map drawn by your own decisions. You believe you are the author of your path. But that belief, that warm illusion of agency is the final comfort you still hold on to. And it's time to let it die. Because free will, as you've been sold, isn't freedom. It's a cage. You don't realize you're inside. You think you choose your thoughts. But you don't even choose your next breath. You think you decide what to want. But where did your wants come from? Did you choose your childhood, your traumas, your rewards, the chemicals flooding your bloodstream when you see a certain kind of smile? No, you were shaped, curated, programmed, and now your decisions are just automated responses to conditions you never authored. Let's go deeper. Neuroscience has shown that your brain begins preparing your choice before you become conscious of it. In Libet's famous experiment, EEG machines detected activity hundreds of milliseconds before a subject reported deciding to move. Your conscious mind is the last to know. It's not the driver, just the PR team scrambling to explain decisions already made by systems beneath awareness. But you feel like you're choosing. Of course you do, because your brain tells a coherent story after the fact. It's not interested in truth. It's interested in narrative. It needs you to feel in control, so you don't collapse from the horror of being a puppet without strings. So it hides the machinery. It hides the algorithms. It hides the biochemical levers that twitch you into action without consent. It lets you believe you chose the red shirt today, when really, you were conditioned to associate that color with attention, or memory, or your mother's mood when she was proud of you. You think you picked your career, but what if you only picked from the options you were psychologically permitted to consider? What if the you doing the choosing was already sculpted by 1,000 invisible hands? Hands that told you what success looks like. Hands that told you which parts of yourself to silence. Hands that punished deviation and rewarded compliance until your choice was indistinguishable from obedience. This is the sickness of modern freedom. We are bombarded with options but robbed of authorship. We scroll endlessly, mistaking abundance for agency. We mistake reaction for decision. You didn't choose to feel insecure about your body. That was sold to you by an industry that profits from shame. You didn't choose to chase productivity. That was engineered by an economic system that equates exhaustion with virtue. You didn't choose your addictions. They were embedded in the dopamine cycles of digital architecture. And yet, you blame yourself. This is the genius of control. You were taught to self-police, to believe your limitations were your own doing, to feel shame when you fail within a rigged system, because, when you believe you are free, you never rebel. You internalize your leash. You decorate your cage. You post motivational quotes on the inside of your cell. Even morality is an illusion of choice. You think you act ethically because you are good, but what you call good was defined for you by your culture, your parents, your tribe. You fear bad not because of logic, but because of conditioning. Remove the context, and you would justify anything. History proves this. Ordinary people committed atrocities, not because they were evil, but because the system redefined evil and called it duty, and they chose to comply. Now, you lie awake wondering why you feel stuck, why every decision feels hollow, why your plans don't bring peace, because deep down, something in you knows, you never truly chose this life. It was chosen for you. You are a character trying to write your own script after the ending has been filmed, and your insomnia is not just anxiety, it's the dissonance of a soul trapped inside a marionette. So what now? Are you doomed to be a passenger? Is freedom a fantasy? Is autonomy just a poetic delusion? Maybe, but maybe seeing the strings is the first honest step, because once you realize you are not free, you stop playing the game that was designed to control you. And sometimes the refusal to play is the closest thing to freedom left. So now I ask you, if your choices were never really yours, then who or what has been living your life all this time? And if the hand behind the curtain was always invisible, how would you ever know who you really are? And if the script was written before you spoke, then whose voice echoes when you think you're deciding? The death of meaning. Why everything you believe might be empty. You were told life had meaning, that there was purpose, that behind the chaos, somewhere in the static, there was a message waiting to be decoded. But what if that promise was just a noise-canceling lie? What if meaning itself is not discovered, but fabricated? What if every belief you've ever had was nothing more than a desperate attempt to avoid the horror of randomness? You didn't seek truth, you sought narrative, because without it, you would unravel. Every civilization builds a story, a myth of order, a tale of gods, laws, or progress. We call it religion, we call it science, we call it culture, but it's all the same deep instinct, pattern over panic. The mind cannot bear silence, so it speaks. The soul cannot bear void, so it prays. You don't worship a god, you worship certainty, and when that certainty cracks, you panic, because without it, you see the machinery, the indifference, the random clockwork of a universe that never asked for you. Let's go deeper. In Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he argues that humans survive suffering not by eliminating pain, but by assigning meaning to it. But what happens when even that strategy breaks, when no meaning fits, when suffering is absurd, when no growth emerges from the trauma, just scar tissue and silence? You are left with naked reality, and it does not care what you believe. This is where philosophy collapses. Nietzsche declared God is dead, not as celebration, but as a diagnosis, a terminal prognosis for meaning. He knew that without metaphysical scaffolding, the weight of existence would fall on you. Not just the suffering, but the responsibility to explain it, to justify the unjustifiable, to tell yourself that your loneliness has a lesson, that your grief has a gift. But sometimes there is no gift, just absence, just loss, just the sound of no one arriving when you cry out. You fill the void with affirmations, with self-help mantras, with productivity, with dreams of legacy, but the void remains, because meaning built on denial isn't meaning, it's anesthesia, and eventually, the numbness wears off. You sit in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why nothing feels real anymore. Not because you're broken, but because you've glimpsed the truth. The scaffolding was made of fog. Science tried to help it, mapped the stars, split the atom, sequenced the genome, but it too became religion, a religion of data, a belief in cause and effect. But quantum physics destroyed that certainty. Particles blink in and out of existence. Causality, phrase. Reality bends with observation. The deeper you look, the less you find. There is no floor beneath you, only layers of abstraction, pretending to be ground. And you are a whisper in the storm. Meaning is not waiting to be found. It's waiting to be assigned. And the mind is desperate to assign it, even when the canvas is blank. That's why you turn every wound into a story, every breakup into a lesson, every setback into a sign, because the alternative, that things just happen, is too much to bear. You don't want meaning, you want refuge, a reason to keep going when nothing makes sense, and so you manufacture one. But here's the danger. When meaning is artificially constructed, it must be defended at all costs, because if it crumbles, so do you. So you cling to ideologies, you fight for beliefs you barely understand, you destroy others to protect your narrative, you silence dissent not because it's wrong, but because it threatens your fragile scaffolding. And all of it is fear wearing the mask of conviction. Sleep becomes difficult, not because you lack rest, but because in stillness you hear the rattle of stories you no longer believe, but cannot let go of, the rattle of meaning that has rotted but still decorates your altar. You close your eyes, but your mind replays questions with no answers. What if none of this means anything? What if the people you lost were not lessons, but just gone? What if all your effort is building a cathedral in a vacuum? This is not nihilism. Nihilism is a scream. This is worse. This is the silence after the scream, when you realize you are not punished or blessed, You simply are. And that is the most terrifying thing of all, because it means you can't bargain with reality. You can't pray it into meaning. You can't intellectualize your way out of the abyss. You can only float. So now I ask you, if life has no intrinsic meaning, then what is left when the story ends? And if you're not here for a reason, are you still willing to be here at all? And if the silence remains after meaning collapses, what new shape will your mind take to survive it?